Chapter 197. Summoned by a true person. The cave that Wang Yingfang lived in was called Swan Goose Temple. It was a floating island to the west of Xianling Mountain. This temple was built on top of a cliff. In front of the temple, there was a gurgling mountain spring, grass was everywhere, and birds and beasts were jumping and playing among the wisteria vines. It was full of vitality. There was a clear pond in the temple. The green lotus was beautiful, the white lotus was flawless, and the weeping willows were green. In the shade, there were cicadas and yellows chirping. The trees here were like makeup, and there were exotic flowers everywhere. The scenery was quiet and beautiful, making people forget about their worries. Wang Yingfang invited Zhang Yan to the temple. The two sat down and smiled. "What do you think of my place?" Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "A paradise, nothing more than that." He wasn't flattering her. Xianling Island was built by Tao Jinren. Although it was decorated well, it lacked the beauty of nature. It was obvious that Wang Yingfang's temple was decorated with care. Wang Yingfang smiled after receiving Zhang Yan's praise. The two chatted for a while, then she summoned her disciples to the temple. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that there were 12 disciples. Most of them were demonic cultivators. Their cultivations were not uniform. Most of them were in the clear Qi realm, and only 2 were in the mystic light realm. Among them, there were 3 or 4 who hadn't transformed for a long time. Their cultivations were still low, and there were still scales and feathers behind their ears. It was obvious that they hadn't been taught any Xian techniques. Thus, their demonic aura was still present. It was obvious that they were either from the water race or birds. After demonic cultivators transformed, they all liked to hide their origins. Unless it was a life and death battle, no one would want to show their true form. Zhang Yan glanced at Wang Yingfang. Hearing Guolai praise his junior sister's deep roots, he couldn't help but wonder what this beautiful nun's original form was. Wang Yingfang waved her horsetail whisk and shouted at the disciples, "Your uncle Master Zhang is a direct disciple of Qinsang school. He comes from a large Xianmen sect. Come and greet him." Some of these disciples were taken in by her in the Donghua continent, and some were from the Donghai. Most of them had shallow roots and admired the Xianmen disciples. Hearing that Zhang Yan came from Qinsang school, they all came to greet him and looked at him curiously. Zhang Yan smiled and raised his hand. He said politely, "Martial nephews, no need to be so polite. I didn't know fellow Taoist Wang has so many disciples." Wang Yingfang smiled and shook her head. She sighed, "In Qinsang Yu sect, she doesn't have any disciples." Qinsang. Disciple Wang has no disciples. I don you disciple Qinsang. Sect brother Qinsang has never had before. But I has of sect. Clan, Yu sect, mountain. Qi, sect master, Yao of sect, of temple, 1, 7, sect master of Yi sect, clan, and 1 Yi, mountain, Wang sect, Wang, sect of sect. When she spoke up to hear, she gestured with her hand to call over a young woman that wore yellow clothes and had bright eyes and white teeth. She said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you've met my martial nephew Fu, so take a look at this disciple of mine. How about you?" After looking at her, Zhang Yan suddenly pointed with his finger. A beam of light shot into the girl's eyes. The disciples below all changed color and cried out in surprise. But this girl's face was calm. Her eyes were clear, and she didn't look flustered at all. After looking for a while, Zhang Yan suddenly pointed out with his finger, and a ray of light shot straight into the young woman's eyes. All the disciples below were astounded and exclaimed in shock, but only the young woman's face remained calm, her eyes were clear, and she didn't reveal the slightest trace of panic. Zhang Yan retracted his sword aura midway and nodded his head in praise, "Excellent aptitude, a tenacious temperament and a good foundation. Although it has not been long since you opened your meridians, if you train well, you will have great achievements in the future." His praise was sincere. It carried more weight than the polite words from before. Wang Yingfang was happy when she heard it. She said to the girl, "Lan, thanks Sect Master Zhang for his praise. The girl was smart and obedient. She knew what Zhang Yan meant. She blinked her beautiful eyes and smiled sweetly. Wu Lan, greets Sect Master Zhang. She raised her head and looked at Zhang Yan with her beautiful eyes. Zhang Yan saw her act like this. He laughed in his heart. I was wondering what Wang Daoist was trying to do. I thought she wanted to show off her disciple. So she's asking me for a greeting gift. I'm not afraid of giving away some benefits. I'm just afraid you won't be able to accept it. He smiled and took out an item from his sleeve. It was the Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment. He had the mind-comprehending mystic art. If he was injured, he only needed to circulate his mystic art and he would be able to recover in an instant. Therefore, this item was not very useful to him. He could use it as a favor. He shook his hand and threw a jade bottle to Wu Lan. It's my first time meeting Martial Niece. Sect Master Zhang doesn't have anything good. This item has some effect. I'll give it to you. He didn't favor one over the other. He took out another 11 packets of medicine from his sleeve and gave them out. Wu Lan raised her wrist and carefully received it. She didn't even look at what it was. She bowed and said, Lan, thanks Sect Master Zhang. The disciples below also took the elixir, but after turning it over and over in their hands, they couldn't recognize what it was. One of the disciples couldn't help but open it secretly. He picked it up and looked at it. He smelled it and saw a black lump. He didn't know what it was. It smelled like something burnt. He couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He thought that Zhang Yan gave them something rotten to deal with them. However, Wang Yingfang was sitting on the spot. He naturally wouldn't mock her in public. He couldn't help but despise her in his heart. Wang Yingfang didn't care at first. However, after smelling the smell, she couldn't help but be moved. She suddenly stood up and took a packet of demon medicine. She looked at it and sighed. Friend, the gift is too much. Hearing her say that, the disciples became suspicious. Could it really be some kind of treasure? Some clever disciples quickly kept the jade bottle. They were afraid that the thick-skinned disciples would take it. Back then, in order to cultivate Wang Yingfang and the other two disciples, Tao Xinren put in a lot of effort. He traveled all over the Donghua continent to find countless treasures to help them condense their cores and achieve Tao. He himself wasted hundreds of years of cultivation. Like teacher, like disciple. Wang Yingfang also spared no effort for her disciples. However, she ran around all these years and really didn't have anything good in her hands. Even if she had some wealth, it had long been used up. Wang Yingfang had heard from Guolai that Zhang Yan even had the Hanya Xianzhen grass, this kind of rare thing, on him, so he must be very wealthy. As soon as she saw him, she wanted to do him a favor, and at the same time help her disciples gain some benefits. However, Zhang Yan's gift was a bit too much. The body of a cultivator was like a treasured raft for achieving Tao. It couldn't be damaged at all. With this medicine, their chances of achieving Tao would increase. These disciples were all receiving benefits from Zhang Yan, but she would have to bear the consequences of this favor in the future. If Zhang Yan was just a normal cultivator, it would be fine. However, he was a direct disciple of Qinsang school. According to Guolai, he had his own grotto heaven. Although he was only at the mystic light realm right now, his cultivation might be above hers in 100 years. There was no place for him to ask for help from her, so how was she supposed to return this favor? However, since this item was in her hands, there was no reason to return it. Wang Yingfang saw that Zhang Yan was smiling faintly. It was obvious that he was doing this on purpose. She felt bitter in her heart and sighed. She thought to herself, never mind. Eldest senior brother wants to ask for a celestial palace decree for this fellow Taoist Zhang, but master's attitude is unclear and hasn't said anything yet. If eldest senior brother can't get it, then even if master punishes me, I will think of a way to help this fellow Taoist Zhang and return this favor as soon as possible. While she was thinking with a frown, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist doesn't need to feel troubled. I have something that I need fellow Taoists' help with." Wang Yingfang was not shocked but happy. She said, "May I ask what fellow Taoist needs?" Zhang Yan smiled lightly. "I see that fellow Taoist has a few disciples who have just opened their meridians. I wonder if there is a good jade elixir essence pond in the cave." Wang Yingfang was surprised. "Could it be that fellow Taoist has a nephew that you need to use?" Zhang Yan nodded. "That's right. On that big ship of mine, there is a junior of a master who asked me to look after her. She is also a female cultivator. Now that her cultivation has reached perfection and is about to open her meridians, she wishes to ask for a suitable essence pond." Wang Yingfang didn't even think and agreed almost immediately. She said, "In my Swan Goose Palace, there are 3 first-class essence ponds. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, you can choose any one of them to use." Zhang Yan raised his hands and cupped them. He said with a smile, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. With this, one of my worries has been resolved." Wang Yingfang didn't dare to be careless. She hurriedly bowed and returned the greeting. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It turned out that this fellow Taoist Zhang already had a plan. She had been anxious for nothing. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but glare at him. This glare revealed some flirtatious colors. However, Zhang Yan acted as if he didn't see it. At this moment, a young girl walked in and reported, "Master, there is a person outside. He claims to be a subordinate of Demon King Xian Tong. He was ordered to deliver an item to Uncle Master Zhang as an apology." Wang Yingfang's face revealed a serious expression. This Demon King Xian Tong usually didn't show himself, but he was one of the demon kings that she couldn't see through. When she heard that he and Zhang Yan had a disagreement, she wanted to help resolve it. However, she didn't know what this demon king was up to. After thinking for a while, she said, "Summon this person to the palace." The person who walked into the palace was a delicate boy. His head was lowered and he held a jade plate in his hand. On top of it, there was a brocade box. With Zhang Yan's eyesight, he could naturally see that this brocade box didn't have any spiritual qi. He also didn't know what the demon king was up to. He waved his hand and took the brocade box over. When he opened the lid, he saw a head placed neatly in it. He could vaguely see the flirtatious charm of the person when she was alive. He immediately recognized that it was Consort Jade. Without any change in his expression, he raised his head and asked the boy, "When you left, did Demon King Xian Tong say anything?" The boy said crisply, "My master said that Consort Jade was blinded by greed and offended you. She asked for it and hoped that you wouldn't blame her." Zhang Yan thought for a while and thought to himself, what a good demon King Xian Tong. He closed the box and smiled at the boy, "Go back and tell your demon king that I've accepted this item. I also know his intention. If I'm free in the future, I'll pay him a visit." Although the boy was young, he was unusually calm. He bowed deeply to Zhang Yan and bowed to Wang Yingfang. When he was about to leave, a golden talisman flew into the palace. Wang Yingfang was stunned. She reached out and took it. When she opened her fingers, her expression turned serious and she stood up. She looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated gaze and said, "My master invites you to Xianling Palace. Target equals _blank." Chapter 198. Deceiving the heavens and crossing the sea. Since it was Tao Xinren's invitation, Zhang Yan naturally would not delay. Wang Yingfang personally sent him out of the temple. After the two of them said their goodbyes, Zhang Yan rode on the conveyance light and headed towards the highest peak of Mysterious Spirit Island. On the peak, there was a temple with a golden roof and bronze pillars. It was half hidden in the clouds. Looking at it from the bottom of the mountain, it was dazzling with colorful lights and auspicious mist, making it look like a dream. Zhang Yan flew all the way up the cliff. He saw green vines climbing the walls, old apes climbing the branches, birds flying across the sky from time to time, and cranes chirping. Not long after, he suddenly felt a pressure coming towards him, as if it wanted to press him down. He quickly steadied the conveyance light. However, the higher he went, the heavier the pressure became. In the end, it was as if a 1,000-kilogram boulder was hanging on his body. Zhang Yan had just received Wang Yingfang's guidance, so he knew that the path from here to here was correct. However, he did not hear from her that there would be such an encounter. He did not know whether she deliberately leaked it or she did not know about it. However, the pressure was very similar to the cultivator's earth element qi, so it was as heavy as 1,000 caddies. It was not impossible for him to solve it. He immediately shouted and took out the sword pill. He used the sword escape technique and tore through the air all the way to the top of the mountain. When he reached the top of the cliff, he kept the conveyance light, and his sleeves fluttered as he descended. However, before he landed on the ground, the scenery in front of him suddenly changed. It was as if a curtain had fallen, and the sky and the ground were vast and misty. He could not tell the distance between him and the ground. Zhang Yan had been in battle for a long time, and he instantly understood in his heart that he'd surely stepped into a restriction formation. However, since it was Tao Xinren who invited him here, he would definitely not let him get lost in it. Hence, his expression did not change, and he did not make any movements. He just waited patiently. Sure enough, a dazzling golden bridge flew out in no time and stopped beneath his feet. He smiled, waved his sleeves, and took a step forward. He arrived at the other end of the golden bridge in just a few dozen steps. There were 2 large stone blocks on the left and right, and on each of them was a green lotus and jasper dish. 2 brightly colored parrots with green eyes and red beaks stood on top of them. The parrot on the left said, "Guest, please turn left." The parrot on the right said, "Guest, please turn right." Zhang Yan stopped and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, why did one say left and the other say right?" The parrot on the left said, "One of us only speaks the truth." The parrot on the right said, "One only tells lies." Zhang Yan understood that this was a roadblock that Tao Xinren had purposely set up to test him. If it was anyone else here, they would definitely be in a dilemma, not knowing where to go. However, he sneered and actually turned around without any hesitation. However, after he stepped across the bridge, he did not return to the original boundary. Instead, the gray smoke parted, and he unknowingly stepped into an empty valley. Here, the mountain rain was hazy, and the sky was blue. A winding mountain path appeared in front of him, surrounded by green pines and cypresses, and moss covered the stone steps. He smiled, tidied up his robe, and walked up the steps. Not long after, he reached the top of the slope. He looked up and saw a waterfall falling from a height of several dozen feet. It crashed down with great momentum, stirring up countless ice pearls and jade drops. Beside the clear pond, there was a beautiful young Taoist with eyes like bright stars sitting on a high stone. He held a jade rui in his hand, and there was a majestic blue wand beside his knee. 2 boys stood by his side. When they saw Zhang Yan coming in, they said lightly, "Since you have come, why are you in a hurry to leave?" Zhang Yan stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said calmly, "I am not leaving, I am here to see Tao Xinren." Tao Xinren shifted his gaze, stared at his face, and said in a deep voice, "Since you have come to see me, why did you turn back halfway?" Zhang Yan waved his sleeves, and said casually, "If Xinren wants to see me, I can walk to Xinren. If Xinren does not want to see me, I will not be able to see Xinren no matter how hard I try." Tao Xinren heard this, and suddenly laughed loudly, making a rumbling sound in the valley, and said, seeing the true heart, and pointing to the true meaning, "It is rare, rare." He pointed the jade rui in his hand to a green stone beside him, and said with a smile, "Fellow Zhang, please sit down and talk." Zhang Yan cupped his hands, and said seriously, "Then please forgive me for my rudeness." He walked a few steps forward, and sat down on the green stone beside him without any reservations. Tao Xinren changed his previous coldness, and said with a pleasant expression, "Fellow Zhang, Guolai told me about your purpose of coming here, please give me the 2 seals." A boy beside him walked down from the platform. Zhang Yan came to Mysterious Spirit Island for this matter, and he was already prepared. He immediately handed over the 2 seals that imprisoned Lu Junbai and Monster Queen Junyue. Tao Zhenren took the seals from the boy, took a glance at them, and wiped his hand, and a ray of light flashed past. Then, without any movement from him, the 2 seals flew down, and he said, "In 7 days, the seals will be dissolved." Zhang Yan quickly caught the 2 seals, and stood up to express his gratitude. "Thank you for your help, spiritual master." Tao Zhenren smiled, "Fellow Taoist, don't thank me yet, please sit down first. I also have a matter that I need your help with, and after listening to me, you can decide for yourself whether you are willing or not." Zhang Yan pondered for a while, and then sat down again. Tao Zhenren said calmly, "Fellow Taoist must know that in the Eastern Sea, there will be an immortal palace appearing in the near future." Zhang Yan said cautiously, "I have also heard some rumors, but it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. It is said that once the immortal palace appears, 48 seals will appear. If you are fated, you will be able to obtain one, and enter the immortal palace." Tao Zhenren nodded and laughed, "This is true, but fellow Taoist may not know, but in fact, I have been living in this immortal palace for more than 100 years. Zhang Yan was surprised to hear this, and said in surprise, "In that case, the immortal palace that is about to appear in the sea is already owned by spiritual master?" Tao Zhenren chuckled, and shook his head, "Yes and no. Before me, there was another master of this immortal palace, and now I don't know where he is, but he left a lot of restrictions. Although I can enter this place, to completely refine this immortal palace, it will take more than 100 years of uninterrupted hard work, and I can't even get out in a flash. It is like being trapped in a cage." Zhang Yan glanced at Tao Zhenren, and saw that the latter was sitting there peacefully, but did not look like he couldn't get out at all. Tao Zhenren smiled faintly, and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be confused. Right now, I am not meeting you with my physical body, but with my Yuanying Dharma body. My real body is still being refined in the immortal palace. As long as I wait until January next year, I will be able to completely refine this palace, and it will become the foundation of my Clear Feather sect." Hearing this, Zhang Yan was also surprised. This Tao Zhenren's Yuanying was actually the same as a living person's, and it was obvious that his cultivation had already reached an extremely high level. He had also seen Xiao Mu's Yuanying, but it could not be compared to Tao Zhenren at all. Tao Zhenren's grace and bearing were extraordinary, and he sat there and spoke calmly, making people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. He continued, "This immortal palace is called the Violet Jade Langhan Immortal Palace, and it is formed by gathering 49 deep pavilions and jade buildings. Every palace has its own talisman, and I only hold the main palace's decree, but if I sense that the main palace is about to change hands, the other 48 side palaces will fly out decrees. I will look for another master." Zhang Yan frowned and said, "Perfected One has worked hard for 100 years. If that's the case, aren't we giving it away to someone else?" Tao Zhenren smiled and said, "Not so. Although the side palaces seem to be the same as the main palace, they are not as useful as the main palace, so it is not a big deal even if someone takes them away." He paused for a while, then slowed down his tone and said, "What I am worried about is that at the final moment of refining the immortal palace, my real body cannot move. In the past, I have an old acquaintance who is an elder of the South Flower sect, and he knows a little about the secret of this palace. Therefore, once this palace appears, he will definitely come to seek revenge and find an opportunity to snatch the main palace. By then, the various forces in the Eastern Sea, such as the Chongyue True Temple and the Wudang Spiritual Hall, will definitely hear the news and come to snatch it. Therefore, I need someone to hold the main palace's decree and enter my palace so that no one can tell where I am, so as to deceive everyone and ensure that the main palace is not lost. If we can survive this calamity, my Clear Feather sect will be able to successfully establish a sect and stand on the sea." Zhang Yan thought to himself, so Tao Zhen already had a plan. He used the pretense as the truth and gathered all the demon kings here in the name of establishing a sect. Not only could he deceive others and confuse them, he could also use these people to fight against the enemy together. It's killing two birds with one stone. But from what he said, he obviously wants me to be the person to hold the decree. Tao Xinren looked at him and said, fellow Taoist is smart, so you must know what I mean. Let me ask you, are you willing to lend me a hand? Zhang Yan had doubts in his heart, so he asked, although this is not easy, there are many talents under Perfected One, so why did you choose me? Tao Xinren smiled and said, I was originally the imperial official of the talisman, but he was hit by the Baili godly wind. Now, I can only use a miraculous pill to protect his soul, but he probably won't be able to wake up when the time comes. My 4 disciples are too conspicuous, and among the 3rd-generation disciples, I don't have anyone suitable by my side, so I have no choice but to do this. Furthermore, there is an advantage to choosing you. You are not a member of my Clear Feather sect, so if you hold my decree and occupy a palace, no one will be suspicious. Zhang Yan nodded. What he said was not without reason. No one would have thought that Tao Xinren would entrust his life to an outsider. Moreover, he was a disciple of Qinsang school, so the elder of South China sect might not be able to put down his pride and bully him. Tao Xinren looked at him and smiled. This cannot be forced, it all depends on fellow Taoist's sincerity. If you are unwilling, I won't stop fellow Taoist at all. You just need to swear that you won't reveal this matter, and you can leave. However, if fellow Taoist agrees, my Clear Feather sect can hire you as a guest elder, and you can learn any Tao technique in our sect. Apart from that, if you have any requests in the future, I can promise you 3 things. Hearing this, Zhang Yan was moved. The Tao techniques of Clear Feather sect were exquisite, but he had his own teachings in Qinsang school, so he did not care too much about them. However, if he could get Tao Xinren, the Yuanying Perfected One, to promise him 3 things, it would be worth it. This risk was worth it. However, even now, he was not in a hurry to agree. Instead, he said, Perfected One, Junior is only at the mystic light realm. Putting aside the elder of South China sect, even the demon kings in the East Ocean might not be able to stop them. How can I help Perfected One? Tao Xinren laughed brightly. I was wondering what it was. So, it is this. Fellow Taoist, don't worry. Since I asked you to help me, I naturally have a way to help you. He reached into his sleeve and took out a golden core that was the size of a goose egg. He said, I can teach you a secret technique that will allow you to control this golden core for 6 hours. I know that fellow Taoist is a sword cultivator, and with the help of this golden core, you can even block a core formation cultivator. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he felt that this was a good thing. He did not hesitate anymore and said, Tao Xinren, I will agree to this. Target equals _blank. Chapter 199. The 3 spiritual masters have a discussion. Zhang Yan descended from the peak and went straight to the Dragon Country ship. After he agreed to the Immortal Palace, Tao Xinren immediately taught him a technique and gave him the golden core. This method of controlling other people's golden cores was quite amazing. Tao Xinren had only learned it after entering the Purple Jade Immortal Palace, and there was no other way to learn it. He didn't know who this golden core came from, and even with Zhang Yan's current cultivation, he couldn't tell what grade the golden core was originally. However, Tao Xinren also warned him that although this method was extraordinary, it could only be used 3 times, and each time it was only for 2 to 4 hours. It could only be used at critical moments, and he couldn't rely on it. Therefore, Zhang Yan didn't expect to use this method to pass the test. What he really relied on were the 2 talismans in his hands that hadn't been unsealed yet. After 7 days, Lu Junbai and Monster Queen Junyue would break out of the seal and stay to help him. He calculated the time. Lu Mainyang should have returned by then. At that time, there would be 3 core formation cultivators by his side, and with the help of this golden core, as long as it wasn't spiritual master Yuanying attacking, it would be enough to protect the main palace. The only worry was that there were many forces on the sea trying to snatch the decree, but Tao Xinren was the only one on his side. It was unknown how many Yuanying spiritual masters the other side had. Could Tao Xinren resist? He thought that Tao Zhenren must have some backup plan, but it was just inconvenient for him to tell him. He flew all the way, and before long, he arrived at the sea and landed on the Dragon Country ship that was anchored there. Zhang Pan recognized him and came out to greet him happily, saying, "Master, you're back." Zhang Yan stood on the deck with one hand behind his back and said in a deep voice, "Zhang Pan, go and summon Gu Chuer." Zhang Pan nodded and returned to the cabin. Not long after, Gu Chuer walked out and stood timidly in front of him. Zhang Yan took a closer look at her and saw that she was full of vigor, her eyes were filled with light, and her skin was as smooth as white jade. He nodded and said, "You've improved quite a bit. As expected, you're about to reach that stage. Gu Chuer, I want to take you to a jade elixir flower pond to open your immortal meridians. If we succeed, you can go wherever you want to go in the future. It's no longer my business." Gu Chuer was pleasantly surprised, but she was also a little confused. She was only 13 or 14 years old. When she was brought here by Zhang Yan, she was a little anxious at first, but then she saw that Zhang Yan didn't care about her, only occasionally checking on her progress. Thus, he was relieved. Every day that Jade's slip would nourish her blood vessels and adjust her breathing, her cultivation would get deeper day by day. She herself could also feel that this incantation was very brilliant, it was many times better than what she learned when she was a registered disciple in Chongyu Zhenguan. She grew up in the Chongyu True Temple. Her aptitude was not good, and in the future, she could only be a maidservant of a true disciple. Now that she had obtained this technique, there was hope for her to pry into the Tao. Now that Zhang Yan was actually going to take her to open her meridians, even if he had ulterior motives, she would accept it. Thus, she mustered up her courage and said sincerely, "Thank you, Taoist. Chuer is willing to serve Taoist by your side, serving tea and water, cleaning the cave, trimming the flowers, washing clothes, and folding blankets. Chuer can do anything." Oh. Zhang Yan glanced at her. Although Zhang Pan was loyal, he had only taken human form for a short period of time. His intelligence was just starting to develop, so his brain wasn't too bright and he didn't do things very well. If he had such an obedient maidservant by his side, it wouldn't be too bad. However, after thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. This girl was a disciple he took in as a gift for Pu Yuzi, and her technique was extremely suitable for Butian Pavilion. In the future, she would definitely be someone with great accomplishments, so why should he cut off her path? He smiled and said, "Little Miss Gu, there is no need to be like this. You have a great opportunity, so how can you be a servant for me? You should focus on your cultivation. In the future, when you reach the immortal clouds, you might be able to find a place for yourself." Gu Chuer nodded her head, not really understanding. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Come with me." Gu Chuer took 2 steps forward, and he released the mysterious light. A ball of blue light wrapped around her, and they flew towards the Swan Goose Temple. At this moment, tens of thousands of miles away from mysterious Spirit Mountain, under the bright moon, a 10-zhang-wide chessboard was suspended in the night sky. On it sat 2 Taoists surrounded by clear energy. On the north side sat a Daoren. He had a long beard, a turtle's back, crane's hair, and a fishtail crown on his head. He wore a 7-star battle robe, and there was a ferocious black tiger crouching under his feet. He was currently meditating with his eyes closed. Sitting in front of him was a young Taoist. His face was like jade, and he wore a 9-sun scarf on his head. His waist was tied with a silk sash, and his sleeves were fluttering in the wind. His expression had a sense of pride and arrogance. The two seemed to have been sitting there for a long time. The young Taoist was a little impatient and said, "Senior Chiu, this Yifeng Bo is so arrogant. Why did he make us wait for so long?" Doran's eyelids slightly opened, and he said in a deep voice, "Junior Lin, don't be impatient. I heard that Elder Yi returned to the sect to borrow a treasure. I'm afraid there will be some twists and turns, so it is normal for him to be a little late." The young Taoist snorted and said, "If he can't borrow it, I will teach him a lesson." Just as he finished speaking, there was a laughter that pierced through the clouds and split the sky. Taoist Lin, you have such a temper. Along with this voice, a Taoist with a long beard and a green face with his hair tied into a bun came over on the clouds. In the blink of an eye, he arrived on the chessboard and said, I've made the two Taoists wait for a long time, my apologies. The two people on the chessboard also stood up to return the greeting. Old Taoist Chiu saw a rather inconspicuous green-skinned calabash tied to his waist and said, Fellow Taoist Yi, could this be? Taoist Yi patted the calabash and laughed, that's right, this is the 9-false sun spear calabash that I asked senior brother for. Chiu Doran's eyelids twitched, and he said, it's this treasure. Taoist Yi said, that Tao Zhenhong's mana is amazing, he's only one step away from the Grotto Heaven realm, and he has the help of the 6-shelled black tortoise. Without this treasure, how can the three of us do anything to him? The young Taoist sneered and said, of course, senior brother Tao is from our Nanhua sect, how can he be compared to ordinary people? Taoist Yi heard the sarcasm in his words and glanced at him, but he smiled and did not seem angry at all. Taoist Chiu frowned and said unhappily, Junior brother Lin, Tao Zhenhong's name has long been erased from the ancestral hall, and he also injured many of our disciples, how can you still call him senior brother? Don't say that again. Taoist Lin laughed and said, senior brother, don't say that. Although Tao Zhenhong broke out of the sect, all these years, have you seen him really being ruthless? If he didn't intentionally let senior brother Wei go last time, how could senior brother Wei return alive? Taoist Chiu knew his junior brother's temper and could not do anything to him, so he shook his head slightly and did not want to argue with him. Moreover, he was in front of Taihao School's Yi Fengbua, and he did not want others to laugh at him for no reason. Yi Fengbua smiled and looked around, saying, Tao Zhenhong is about to open his sect, why don't I see fellow Taoist Xiao here? Taoist Chiu shook his head and said, we lost track of him long ago, even the eagles and pigeons couldn't find him, it was as if he disappeared into thin air. Yi Fengbua was surprised and said, could he have returned to Qinsang school? Taoist Lin sneered and said, that's hard to say. Shao clan is a Xianmen clan, they are not the same as us. Yi Fengbua and Taoist Chiu did not refute. They were not from Xianmen clans, if it was not for the conspiracy against Tao Zhenhong, they did not want to have anything to do with this person. Yi Fengbua laughed and patted the gourd on his waist, saying, even if he doesn't come, we still have to look at his face. With this Dharma treasure of mine, even without him, the three of us can definitely take down Tao Zhenhong. Chiu Daoran stroked his beard and said, Tao Zhenhong should be fine with the three of us dealing with him, but his disciples like Xiao Jingcheng, Wang Yingfang, and Yang Lin are all core formation cultivators. Even the most useless Guolai has condensed a small golden core, I don't know how he taught them, but our disciples are far inferior. Taoist Lin shook his head and said, fortunately, Tao Zhenhong is very talented, if it wasn't for these disciples, he would have already become the Taoist master of Dongtian. Chiu Daoran said in a deep voice, we need to think of a safer way. His disciple Chiu Ju and Yi Fengbua's disciple Chu Jiu were only mystic light realm cultivators, if they fought, they could only stall Tao Zhenhong, but they would not be able to deal with his disciples. Originally, with Xiao Mu here, they didn't need to think about this at all, but now that he was nowhere to be found, they were in a bit of a dilemma. Yi Fengbua laughed and said, fellow Taoists don't need to worry, I went to the Wudang Spirit Hall once and have already convinced Taoist Master Pei, he is willing to bring disciples to help us. Wudang Spirit Hall. Chiu Daoran frowned. Taoist Lin laughed coldly and said, fellow Taoist Yi is so generous. The Wudang Spirit Hall was a loose sect created by a group of wandering cultivators with high cultivation levels, so cultivators from large Xian sects looked down on them. They came here to deal with Tao Zhenhong and also for the Purple Jade Langhan Celestial Palace. They had already seen this Celestial Palace as something in the bag, but now that Yi Fengbua had asked the people from the Wudang Spirit Hall to help, they were bound to split the Celestial Palace, so the two of them were not happy. Yi Fengbua saw their ugly expressions and hurriedly said, fellow Taoists, please listen to me. This time, when the Celestial Palace appeared, Tao Zhenhong invited a few monster kings of the Eastern Sea to attend the ceremony. He might use his guts to fight against us. Also, don't forget that there is still the Chongyue True Temple above the Eastern Sea. They might be watching us from behind and waiting to reap the benefits, so we have to be on guard. Qiu Daoren thought carefully and nodded. Fellow Taoist Yi is right. Compared to the Chongyue True Temple, although the people in the Wudang Spirit Hall are wandering cultivators, they are quite trustworthy and won't stab us in the back. Taoist Lin said coldly, I have long disliked the actions of the Chongyue True Temple. If there is a chance this time, I will definitely teach them a lesson. Yi Fengbo smiled and said, speaking of which, I heard a piece of good news. Su and Su Daoren of the Chongyue True Temple failed to break through and died. We got rid of a big enemy. Qiu Daoren paused for a moment before saying slowly, Su Daoren's lifespan is almost up. If he doesn't try, he will die for sure. I wonder who did he leave the murderous Yin blade with? Yi Fengbo said, I heard that he left it with a mystic light realm disciple. Taoist Lin said in disdain, a mystic light realm cultivator can only use 10 to 20% of the blade's power. What a waste. However, old Taoist Qiu shook his head and said, even so, with the ferocious might of this saber, I'm afraid no one in our sect can defeat him. We need to warn them that if they encounter this person, they should retreat, lest they lose their lives in vain. Target equals _blank. Chapter 200. In a quiet room of the Swan Goose Temple, Zhang Yan sat on a futon and stared at a talisman floating in front of him. He exhaled a mouthful of spiritual qi, and the talisman trembled slightly and emitted a candlelight. When the light became brighter, he reached out and grabbed the ball of white light from his sleeve. 9VK start / he had seen this thing before. It was a ball of essence formed by the qi of the 5 metals in the veins of the earth. He did not know who had refined it into a small piece of meteoric iron. This method seemed to be used to make a good sword pill. If it was tempered repeatedly with the true fire and absorbed the spiritual qi of the sun and moon on a high platform every day, it might be possible to make a good sword pill after thousands of years. However, Zhang Yan had the sword pill, so he did not need it. Now that he took it out, he wanted to make a sword talisman of the fighting gate, recorded in the Talisman Pouch book. Since he wanted to protect the main residence of the Immortal Palace for Tao Xunren, it was better to prepare one more method. This sword talisman was very powerful, but because it had lost the incantation of the sect of alchemy, it could only be used once. It was a life-saving talisman in times of crisis. In the past 7 days, he had spent almost everything. This talisman had gathered more than 10,000 spiritual shells spiritual qi. If it was not for the fact that he had reached his limit, he would not stop even if he had to give up all the spiritual shells. He even poured the spiritual qi from the 4 symbols god-killing formation into the talisman. He had used up a lot of this spiritual qi in the river Styx, and the remaining spiritual qi was not enough for refining medicine and weapons. He simply refined all of it into this sword talisman. However, the spiritual qi was enough, but it was still lacking a little qi of the 5 metals. He could use this spiritual qi to make up for it. The spiritual qi seemed to know that a disaster was coming, and it struggled desperately in Zhang Yan's hand. It made a hissing sound and shot out sharp qi, cutting the furniture in the quiet room one after another. Zhang Yan sneered, and a beam of light shot out from his mouth, trapping the soul. Then, he activated his inner breath, and spat out the golden light and raging fire on it. About 4 hours later, he finally dispersed the 5 metal qi. Then, he shouted and slapped the talisman. A whistling sound rang out in the quiet room. The golden talisman pierced through the roof tiles and shot up into the sky. Zhang Yan also leaped straight into the clouds. He saw the talisman hovering in mid-air, his whole body emitting a dense sword aura, and his eyes were cold. He smiled faintly and cast a spell. The talisman turned into a golden light and circled around him before returning into his sleeve. He was not in a hurry to return to the temple and sat cross-legged on the cloud. The wind from the sea made his clothes flutter noisily. He gazed into the distance and saw the changing clouds on the horizon, the fog blurred, the dark clouds pressing down on the sea as if they were about to collapse. It was as if the heaven and earth were boundless and the wind and clouds were gathering. The auspicious cloud that emerged from the bottom of the sea grew brighter and brighter. It was obvious that the immortal abode would be born soon. Although he could see the brilliance of the immortal abode, the immortal palace was actually erratic and had no fixed location. Other than Tao Jinren, no one knew where it was hiding. At this moment, the sun was setting in the west, and the sky was dark and gloomy, but he was still sitting on the cloud, as if he was waiting for something. When the hour of the high arrived, the two talismans he originally placed on the jade couch suddenly shook and rushed out of the dome. Two streaks of multicolored light flew out and illuminated the entire night sky. Amidst the smoke, a colorful pheasant gave a faint cry. The smoke dispersed, revealing a graceful figure. A woman in red gracefully came over. She smiled and bowed to Zhang Yan, saying softly, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for helping me escape from the confinement." With a loud laugh, Lu Junbai, who had restored his old appearance, also walked over and cupped his hands in gratitude. "It's all thanks to fellow Taoists' help to get through this disaster." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and returned the greeting, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me into the temple for a chat. I have another important matter to discuss with you." The night sky was low and the bright moon was in the sky. A mysterious snake's 9 orifices great sea boat was anchored on the sea. The waves below were tumbling, but the boat was flashing with green aura rainbows, as if there was an intense battle going on. Qiu Ju was scurrying around on the conveyance light. He was forced into a difficult situation by a flying needle that was as thin as a cow's hair. Seeing that he couldn't dodge it no matter what, he had to say, "Senior Marshal Brother Tseng, I admit defeat, I admit defeat." The flying formation was suddenly taken away by someone. The white aura on the opposite side dissipated, and a young Taoist walked out. He was wrapped in a black robe, and his feet were on cloud shoes. He held a 3 feet long Ganoderma in his hand, and the crown was 10 feet wide, like a green umbrella. He smiled faintly and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Qiu, you're too humble. Your Nanhua sect is good at controlling spiritual birds and strange beasts. If it wasn't for your flower falcon being taken away by Shinmingu, and you couldn't use 70% of your original Taoist techniques, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to defeat you so easily." Qiu Ju originally had a sunken nose and thick lips, and his forehead was like a tree wart. His appearance was weird, and now that he heard these words, he felt like his sore point was poked, and his expression turned even uglier. That day when he went against Shinmingu, he couldn't take it anymore and made a bet with him. In the end, he was defeated, and even lost his spiritual bird. Although the other party was covering for him on the surface, he was secretly mocking his Nanhua sect for not having the help of a spiritual beast. However, he wasn't good with words, so he just moved his lips, and couldn't make a sound. Zhu Jiu, who was standing at the side and watching the battle, saw that the atmosphere was a little stiff, so he walked over with a smile. He patted Qiu Ju's shoulder and sighed, "Senior Marshal Brother Qiu, don't mind him. My senior martial brother Tseng Han has been in Taoism for 135 years, and has met countless fellow Taoists. His foundation is very solid, and now he's only one step away from core formation. This star-en ray needle has been practiced to perfection, and his cultivation is far above mine. It's not wrong for you to lose." Qiu Ju was silent for a moment, then he cupped his hands and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Tseng is brilliant, I'm not as good as you." Tseng Han smiled proudly, then looked to the side and saw a girl in a white dress standing there quietly, like a pure white lotus. He asked, "Sister Xian, you are a disciple of the Yuan Yang martial school, why don't you tell me if there are any flaws in my acupuncture technique? Can it win against Shinmingu?" This woman was called Xian Chanjin, and she was a true disciple of Yuan Yang sword sect. That day, she sensed the location of the 7 ultimate pillars, so she came all the way to the East Sea. She and Tseng Han were old acquaintances, so they walked together. Tseng Han asked this question with the intention of showing off, hoping to hear some good words, but she thought about it seriously and said, "Although I don't know Shinmingu, according to what Senior Marshal Brother Chiu and Senior Marshal Brother Chu said. With Senior Marshal Brother Tsing's ability, he still had some chance of winning, but now he's more likely to lose. Tseng Han heard this and felt a little uncomfortable. He frowned and said, "Why? I'd like to hear Junior Marshal Sister's opinion." Xian Chanjin said calmly, "Shen Minggu's yin yang flying dagger can be used at close range, and it's extremely fierce. But it has a flaw, and that is, it's not easy to fly during a fight. If you suddenly meet, the one who makes the first move will have some advantage." Tseng Han didn't agree at first, but after hearing this, his face turned serious, and he couldn't help but nod in agreement. He said, "That's reasonable. After my two junior marshal brothers lost to him, I knew that if I fought him face to face, I wouldn't be able to win even after a day and night. Only by making the first move will I have a chance of winning." "But Junior Marshal Sister Xian, why don't you think I can win?" Xian Chanjin faintly said. Shen Minggu is aware of his own weakness, so he set up a trap and won the flower falcon from Senior Brother Chiu. With the falcon's help, he can advance and retreat at will when facing the enemy. For the time being, he has no weaknesses to look for. Tseng Han was startled, and he also frowned in deep thought. Although he thought highly of himself, he wasn't a shallow person who wouldn't listen to good advice, so he immediately re-evaluated this opponent in his heart. Xian Chanjin's jade-like fingers lightly stroked the sword at her waist and said, "If this Shen Minggu isn't Senior Marshal Brother Tsing's opponent, I would also want to fight with him." Tseng Han recovered from his thoughts, and said with a smile, "Junior Marshal Sister Xian, don't be disappointed. I heard that the Chongyujian Temple has two disciples who are the best. One is Shen Minggu, and the other is Su Qiu. Now that the immortal abode on the sea is about to appear, all forces are gathering, and we also want to go and fight. When that time comes, Junior Marshal Sister won't have to worry about not meeting a good opponent." Chu Jiu coughed, and interrupted, "Senior Marshal Brother, you and Senior Marshal Sister Xian just arrived here, so you don't know. I heard that Su Qiu fought with Qinsang school disciple Zhang Yan on the sea a few days ago, and was defeated and captured. Now it's unknown whether he's dead or alive." "Oh." Tseng Han raised his eyebrows, and said, "Qinsang school disciple? Junior Marshal Brother has seen this person?" Chu Jiu nodded, and said, "I have. That day, I don't know what method he used to kill Chongyujian Temple's elder Bei Gong Hao, he's really amazing. We happened to be on Qifeng Island that day, so we met him." Tseng Han smiled coldly and said, "I've also fought with a few true disciples of the Yutsang sect, but none of them lived up to their name. Since this person has come to the Eastern Sea, he's most likely here to fight for the Immortal's Abode. Master said that the Immortal's Abode will appear in 10 days at the latest. If I meet him, I'd like to have a good fight with him." Chu Jiu had fought with Bei Gong Hao before, and the fact that Zhang Yan was able to kill him showed that he was extremely powerful. Therefore, he hesitated for a moment, and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, we are only going to deal with Tao Zhenhong's disciples on Master's orders. Let's not complicate the issue, shall we?" Tseng Han raised his eyebrows, and was about to speak. At this moment, a talisman flew through the air. He caught a glimpse of it from the corner of his eye, and immediately flew into the air to grab it. After removing the restriction, he placed it in front of his eyes, and couldn't help but feel refreshed. He raised his head, and said, "Master has already deduced the location of the Immortal Abode's appearance, and has specially sent a talisman to inform us, summoning us to meet him as soon as possible." Hearing this, Chiu Ju, Chu Jiu, and the others all showed excitement in their eyes. If they could get their hands on this purple jade Immortal Abode, their great Tao would be within reach. Only Xian Chanjin's jade-like expression remained unchanged. Her beautiful eyes pierced through the waves, staring into the distance, and the magic sword beside her was giving off a faint cry. At this moment, in the cabin of the sea boat, Lady Shan and Master Kai sat facing each other, sipping tea. Senior Marshal Sister Kai said enviously, "That fellow Daoist Xian must also be interested in fighting for that immortal abode. Sigh, they are all disciples of big sects, and have a lot to talk about. At first, they were still polite to us, but when that fellow Taoist Xian came, she ignored us. At this point, her heart was filled with disappointment and jealousy. Lady Shan saw through her thoughts, and couldn't help but advise, Senior Marshal Sister, we are Taoists. Before she could finish, Senior Marshal Sister Kai interrupted her impatiently, saying, Stop, stop, stop. Junior Marshal Sister, why do you have to say that you want to be pure and have few desires? I, your Senior Marshal Sister, cultivate Taoism to stay young forever, and it's enough for me to find a suitable Taoist companion to live freely in this world. Don't talk about immortality, your Senior Marshal Sister isn't cut out for that. Lady Shan sighed, and said softly, Senior Marshal Sister, cultivating Taoism can't help you live forever. In the end, you're just a pile of dirt. Senior Marshal Sister Kai glared at her, stomped her feet, and said, Junior Marshal Sister, everyone has their own fate. I just want to live a vigorous life, and as long as I have a few hundred years of happiness, I'm willing to die. Target equals _blank. Chapter 201. With a clap of thunder, the rainbow ripples reflected the appearance of the immortal's mansion. The rainbow lights on the sea grew brighter day by day. Many cultivators on Xianling Island could see it clearly and knew that the day of the immortal's mansion's appearance was approaching. Wang Yingfang sat on the back of a giant goose and gazed into the distance. Her fingers were constantly divining, as if she was divining good fortune. Suddenly, a beautiful girl riding a crane came over and said, Master, Uncle Master Feng is here. He is waiting in the hall. Wang Yingfang replied, Okay. She patted the goose's head and pressed the cloud down. She walked slowly into the hall and saw a person standing in the hall. It was a Taoist nun with slender eyes and a colorful cape draped over her shoulders. Her figure was graceful, but there was a layer of haze between her brows. When he saw her, he stood still and said with a sullen face, Where is my nephew? Wang Yingfang smiled and cupped her hands, Junior Marshal Sister Feng, your nephew Feng is fine. He is in my back hall and has been meditating for the past few days. He has become less impetuous. Senior Marshal Sister must have read my letter. Once you and fellow Taoist Zhang have resolved this layer of misunderstanding, I will let him go. Hearing this, the female Taoist nun suddenly became furious. She raised her eyebrows, waved her sleeve, and scolded, Don't say that. Wang Yingfang, before you became Jinren Tao's disciple, I listened to the Tao together with you under Hengshan ancestor. We could be considered close. My nephew is like your nephew. Why are you siding with an outsider now and asking me to come and apologize? Seeing her harsh words, Wang Yingfang's originally pretty face twisted a little. She was unhappy and frowned. Feng Yao conspired with others to steal fellow Taoist Zhang's magic weapon. If it was someone else, they would have been killed on the spot. It was because he sacrificed the white feather that I refined and escaped to my door that I saved him once. It was only because of our old friendship that I wanted to resolve the conflict between our two families. Why does Senior Marshal Sister Feng say that I am siding with an outsider? The nun sneered and said, Even so, it is impossible for me to make amends. If you still care about our past friendship, don't interfere in this matter. Let me settle things with that Zhang fellow. Wang Yingfang was also annoyed. This is a small matter that can be resolved by both sides talking. Senior Marshal Sister, you don't appreciate my kindness. Do you want to fight until there is blood? The Taoist nun snorted, Small matter. Although my Taimi Mountain's Feng clan's name isn't well known, it still has several thousand years of inheritance. How could we have the intention to apologize? Wang Yingfang shook her head. She knew the background of the other party. Previously, Mount Taimi had also produced a few extraordinary great demons, but now, there were only 2 core formation cultivators left in this lineage. They could barely hold up the situation, but they still spoke so arrogantly. She thought to herself, I haven't seen this Feng Mei for more than 100 years and I didn't think she was this unreasonable before. Why is she pestering me now? Before she became Tao Jinren's disciple, wasn't she also like this? Before she became Jinren Tao's disciple, wasn't she also someone who didn't care about anything when blood rushed to her head? It was only because she practiced the Xianmen Heart Sutra in the Immortal Palace that she hid this evil aura and hid her demonic nature. When she thought up to here, her heart seemed to have become clearer, and she seemed to have comprehended some profundities. When she calmed her mind was already clear, and she faintly felt that the obstacles on her path of cultivation seemed to have reduced slightly. She looked carefully again and saw that there was a layer of black air between this Taoist nun's eyebrows. She was trapped in a tribulation without being aware of it. Her heart was like still water. She smiled and said, "If that's the case, Senior Marshal Sister Feng can go. I promised fellow Taoist Zhang, but I can't let him go." The Taoist nun was furious. She pointed at Wang Yingfang and said, "Wang Yingfang, don't think you can do whatever you want just because you've become Tao Xinren's disciple. You need to know that someone is going to punish you. I'm an honored guest invited by your fourth martial brother Yang Lin. If you don't let him go, I'll ask him to come talk to you." Wang Yingfang smiled and waved her horsetail whisk, saying, "See the guest out." The Taoist nun was suddenly pushed up by a gust of wind. Her vision darkened and she involuntarily retreated. When she opened her eyes, she found that she was already outside the Swan Goose Monastery. She didn't know how she got out. She was shocked and thought, "Wang Yingfang has learned this kind of Xianmen, I'm not her match." Luckily, her fourth martial brother Yang Lin has some disagreements with her. "I'll ask him to come and uphold justice." She turned around and got on top of the cloud. After a few steps, she saw a young Taoist sitting in the cloud. She took a closer look and said happily, "Fellow Taoist Yang, you're here too. Do you know that your senior martial sister bullied me? You must help me with this." The Taoist smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Feng, how do you want me to help you?" The Taoist nun said with hatred, "You only need to hand over that Zhang Yan to me." The Taoist was expressionless and said, "You must make things difficult for that fellow Taoist Zhang." The Taoist nun's heart was filled with hatred, so she didn't hear anything strange. She gritted her teeth and said, "Yes." The Taoist let out a loud laugh and waved his sleeve in the air, throwing out a white jade snake-like ring with its head and tail. The snake-like ring wrapped around the female Taoist's head. The female Taoist was caught off guard by the snake-like ring around her neck. She immediately lay down and turned into a white-bellied, black-winged, white-tailed swift. The Taoist went up and grabbed the jade ring. He sneered, "You're just a feathered animal. You don't know the heavens and the general situation. Fellow Taoist Zhang is of great importance, how can you disturb him?" With that, he picked up the jade swallow and walked towards the clouds in large strides. In a flash, his figure disappeared. Wang Yingfang didn't see it with her own eyes, but she seemed to know about it. She wrote a Taoist talisman and sent it to Zhang Yan to inform him that it was over. Zhang Yan looked at the talisman but didn't take it to heart. He wanted to protect the main palace for Tao Xinren. If someone wanted to make things difficult for him, it would be difficult for Tao Xinren. Therefore, he didn't need to think too much about it. He only needed to meditate and adjust his breathing, waiting for the right time to come. Another 5 days passed and a thunderous sound came from the sea. The red glow shone through the restriction and shone on the island, making everyone's face feel warm. Zhang Yan knew that the immortal abode was about to come into the world and was trying to break through the original restriction. The sound that resounded through the East Sea was the first restriction being broken. He shouted, "Fellow Taoists, please follow me." He flew up into the sky and released a small boat that was given by Lady Yin. He stood on top of the inner treasure pavilion and 2 streams of smoke descended. Demon King Jun Miao and Lu Junbai landed on the top of the boat and stood on both sides of him. Zhang Yan steered the ship and flew into the sky. He looked around and saw that there were thousands of lights on Mystic Spirit Island. The cultivators rode on their mystic instruments and gathered at one place. The waves on the sea and the clouds above were pushed away by this spiritual spiral. However, after that sound, there were no more movements on the surface of the sea. This immortal mansion was erratic and not confined to one place, so they didn't know where to go. The crowd of cultivators was at a loss. At this moment, a whistling sound came from the sky, and a golden talisman flew over. It transformed into a dancing five-colored divine bird that led the way. Zhang Yan saw that it was Tao Jinren who was leading the way and nodded. He controlled the boat and followed the five-colored divine bird with thousands of cultivators. In order to protect Taoist Master Tao's mansion this time, he put away the great ocean boat and mixed in with the many cultivators, not very conspicuous. Looking around, he saw a burly Taoist about 10 feet tall riding a 6 cranes flying heaven chariot leading the way. Behind him on the left was Wang Yingfang riding a wild goose, and on the right was a young Taoist riding a huge eagle. Behind them were a group of third-generation disciples. Looking around, Wei Lihua was among them. As if sensing his gaze, she couldn't help but turn back and smile at him, but her eyes were slightly apologetic. Zhang Yan also nodded in greeting. He thought to himself, I think the leader should be Tao Jinren's second disciple, Zhao Jingcheng. The other young Taoist should be Yang Lin, who is ranked last. He understood that even though Guolai was Tao Jinren's first disciple, he was only a small golden core cultivator. Therefore, it was not his turn to take care of this matter. He didn't know where he was hiding. At that moment, Lu Junbai sighed. These Taoists were invited by Tao Jinren, right? If we can seize the immortal abode in one go, no one will be able to stop Clear Feather sect from opening. Monster Queen Jun Miao looked around and said, Tao Jinren is so influential. I even saw a few monster kings. They are all powerful figures in the Eastern Sea. Lu Junbai snorted and said, if it wasn't for the immortal abode, why would they be willing to come? Where the benefits lie. Zhang Yan smiled. 20 years ago, when Tao Jinren's Yuanying Dharmakaya went to the sea, he already had a plan. He ordered his disciples to make friends with people from all walks of life. Now that he was using the immortal abode as bait, all he needed to do was to take the lead. Naturally, these people would flock to him like a flock of ducks. The colorful bird that led the way traveled for about 1,000 miles. Suddenly, it swayed its body and dived into the sea, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhao Jingcheng, who was at the front, waved his Taoist robe and stopped the 6 cranes flying heaven chariot. He said loudly, fellow Taoists, the immortal abode is right here. I believe it will be born soon. When the time comes, the immortal palace's decree will fly out and choose its owner. First, set up the prohibition talisman door to prevent enemies from robbing it. His voice rumbled. The Clear Feather sect's disciples behind him heard him. Under the lead of Wang Yingfang and Yang Qi, they went to different places to set up talismans and formations. When the monster kings and rogue cultivators from the Eastern Sea saw this, they followed suit. They led their disciples to different places and set up the formations. Although it seemed like they were prepared, compared to the Clear Feather sect's orderly and unhurried way of doing things, it seemed a little messy. Zhang Yan was very clear that these prohibition formations could only be used for temporary protection. When the immortal palace's decree flew out to find its owner, if someone came to fight for it, they would still have to rely on their own cultivation base to determine the winner. However, this time, he only came to protect the main palace. There were 2 core formation cultivators behind him, so he didn't need to set up any prohibition formations. Thus, he stood still. However, Wei Lihua kept paying attention to this place. When she saw that everyone was setting up the prohibition formations, but only Zhang Yan didn't move, she thought to herself, I heard that junior martial sister Fu Hongqian didn't take good care of fellow Taoist Zhang last time, and someone even came to pick a fight with him. It's my fault. Fellow Taoist Zhang just came here, so he probably didn't prepare any celestial tools. Although there are powerful prohibition formations on his sea boat, it can't raise clouds and cover his body. Wait for me to give him a celestial tool as an apology. She waited until she was done arranging the Dharma gate here, then flew over with a streak of light. When she arrived in front of Zhang Yan, she bowed and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, I left in a hurry last time, so I didn't treat you well. It's my fault. I see that you don't have any celestial tools to set up formations with you. I have one here, please accept it. Target equals underscore blank. Chapter 202. The Battle of Dao. What's right or wrong? After Wei Lihua finished speaking, she heard someone calling her from behind. She nodded and handed the array flag to Zhang Yan, smiled, and turned to leave. Lu Junbai looked at her back and said, "This Daoist is kind." Monster Monarch Junhua looked at Zhang Yan and pursed her lips into a smile. "Daoist Zhang, I'll go and set up the array flag for you, lest that girl worries again." Zhang Yan smiled and handed over the array flag. Monster Monarch Junhua took it and went to set up the array. At this time, in addition to the cultivators from Mysterious Spirit Island, there were also many itinerant Taoists who sensed the activity of the mansion and rushed over in groups of 2s and 3s. However, they were afraid of the thousands of cultivators gathered here and floated far away, not daring to come closer. Monster Monarch Junyu carefully arranged the array flags and turned back to the bow. She looked into the distance and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, even the people from the Eastern Sea Reef Prefecture are here. Is such a prestigious clan also coveting the immortal abode? Lu Junbai snorted. The disciples of the Reef Prefecture are also divided into those who are direct and those who are not concubines. Not everyone can obtain the orthodox teachings. Not to mention them, even the disciples of the big sects, if they don't have a Dao field like Daoist Zhang, would have to live under someone else's roof. This time, there are 49 immortal mansions. As long as you obtain one of them, you will be able to establish your own sect and live freely. You will no longer be restricted to one island or one place, and you will be able to overcome many obstacles on your path to Dao. How can they not be tempted? Monster Monarch Junyu nodded silently. It was not easy for an itinerant cultivator like her to reach the core formation realm. If she did not have a good cave abode where she could store her chi and protect her life, it would be extremely difficult for her to reach the nascent soul realm. For hundreds of years, the 18 monster monarchs of the East Sea seemed to be famous, but in reality, none of them could break through this shackle. This showed how difficult it was to take this step. Demon Monarch Junyu had cultivated for more than 400 years and had personally seen several elders die after their lifespans came to an end. No matter how powerful they were, they would still turn into a pile of dust. She thought to herself, fellow Daoist Zhang has a blessed heavenly abode in his possession now. If I can help him properly, he might accept me into his abode to cultivate. At this moment, her expression suddenly changed. She looked towards the south and saw a wisp of white smoke coming towards them. At the same time, joy appeared on Lu Junbai's face as he said, "My sister is back." After Lu Mainyang sent her daughter to be reincarnated, she wanted to meet up with Zhang Yan. However, she did not know the way and could not find her way to Mysterious Spirit Island. Not long ago, she sensed the aura left behind by Lu Junbai and rushed over. Zhang Yan was also in high spirits. Lu Mainyang's return at this time undoubtedly increased his chances of protecting the immortal palace. Lu Mainyang was originally a core transformation third-stage cultivator. When she flew over, the commotion was not small and naturally attracted the attention of the Clear Feather sect disciples. Even Zhao Jingcheng and the others looked over. Zhang Yan hurriedly sent a talisman over. When the Clear Feather sect disciples saw it, they knew it was one of their own, so they stopped and ignored it. Lu Mainyang was dressed in white and her black hair was tied up with a golden band behind her shoulders. At this moment, she rode on a cloud and arrived in front of Zhang Yan. She first looked at Lu Junbai and Demon Monarch Junyu, then she bowed and said happily, "Fellow Daoist Zhang, Mainyang is really grateful to see my younger brother and junior sister Jing escape today." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. He said, "You're welcome. Fellow Daoist Lu, you came at the right time. Today, I want to seize an immortal abode and need your help." Lu Mainyang did not ask for the reason. She only said solemnly, "Mainyang will not refuse." Lu Mainyang was also one of the 18 demon monarchs of the sea. Naturally, many people recognized her. From afar, demon monarch Xian Tong's sister, Tong Ying, saw them and said strangely, "Big brother, look over there. It's demon monarch Jing and demon monarch Lu." Who is that Taoist? How can he order these 3 people around? Could he be a new disciple of Tao Zhenren? Demon monarch Xian Tong's eyes flashed. He said in a low voice, that person is Zhang Yan. Tong Ying was dumbfounded. She looked at Lu Mainyang and Jing Miaojuan standing behind Zhang Yan. She was shocked and secretly rejoiced. If she did not listen to her brother and fought with Zhang Yan that day, the result would be unpredictable. Another loud bang sounded on the sea. This was the second restriction of the immortal abode being broken. Everyone could hear it clearly. The immortal abode was not far from here. The disciples of Clear Feather had erected the flag gate and carried out a cloud raft. Zhao Zhenqing walked out and ordered his disciples to set up the table, light the incense and candles, and then stood under the cloud raft. Wang Yingfang and Yang Qi also stood solemnly by the side. The rogue cultivators around saw Clear Feather's actions and knew that it was to welcome Tao Zhenren's arrival, so they all focused their attention to watch. In a moment, there was a whistling sound in the sky. Guo Lai rode a peng and opened a path. When he reached the sky, he dodged to the side and shouted, "Clear Feather disciples, what are you waiting for? Greet the patriarch." 3 core formation cultivators and hundreds of their disciples stood respectfully and did not dare to move. They said in unison, "Greetings, patriarch." Above them, the clouds parted and splendor sprinkled down. There seemed to be ethereal celestial music. Tao Zhenren arrived on a blue wan. He was surrounded by green smoke and colorful mist. 9 heavenly cranes followed him like white snow. Behind him were 2 fair-skinned boys riding on the cranes. One of them held a golden ring and a silver bell and a sealed incense burner. The other held a longevity pine tree and a rui whisk. Tao Zhenren came up to the cloud raft. When he sat down, he said with a smile, "The immortal abode is about to appear. There will definitely be strong enemies coming to snatch it. Are you all ready?" Zhao Zhenqing hurriedly went forward and said, "Benefactor, disciple has already arranged everything according to your orders. All the flag gates have been erected. I dare not make the slightest mistake." At this moment, the rogue cultivators outside suddenly became restless. They saw the sea in the distance churning and stirring up strong winds and heavy rain. The wind and clouds changed color and thunder rumbled. A thick dark cloud rolled over. Tao Zhenren smiled and raised his head. His eyes emitted divine light. 2 light pillars, one green and one white, flew up to the clouds. In an instant, the layer of haze was dispelled and the sky was once again revealed. The strong winds and clouds in front of them also dispersed. 4 flying ships appeared. On each ship stood a Yuanying Zhenren. Their bodies were faintly glowing in auspicious mist. Behind them, there were hundreds of cultivators riding on light and clouds. It was a majestic scene. In this open sea, it was not easy to see a Yuanying Zhenren. Now, other than Tao Zhenren, there were actually 4 of them. The surrounding rogue cultivators looked at each other in shock and quickly avoided them. At this moment, there was a sound like falling rain. More than 1,000 spirit geese flew out from the ship and gathered together to form a wild goose bridge. The 4 Zhenrens each flew out in a ray of light and stepped on it. They slowly walked forward. Qiu Daoren pointed below and sneered, 3 Taoists, today, Tao Zhenhong was deceived by the true spirit of the celestial abode. He did not know the heavens and did not avoid the calamity. Today, if we want to kill him, we can take advantage of the situation and take his life. We will return the celestial abode and complete our Tao. Yifeng's brows moved and killing intent appeared on his face. He said, "What Zhenren Qiu said makes sense. The heaven's secrets are in my hands. I am about to settle the situation and kill this bastard." Taoist Lin only sighed and shook his head. Standing on the left of the 3 of them was a young Taoist. His skin was white like a virgin and his eyes were lively. He heard this and chuckled. He said, "If you don't take what heaven gives you, you will be punished." Tao Zhenren saw the 4 of them and he stood up calmly. He greeted them from afar, For Taoists, how have you been? Among the four of them, Qiu Daoren and Yifengbo sneered and stood still. Taoist Lin hesitated for a moment and did not move. The young Taoist returned the greeting and chuckled. He said, Tao Zhenren, both you and my Wudang Spiritual Hall have set up sects on the East Sea. I, Pei Huan, don't want to make things difficult for you. However, I owe Taoist Yi a favor, so I have to come. If I have offended you today, you can go all out and I won't blame you. Tao Zhenren also smiled. He said, Taoist Pei is a straightforward person. I still want to be useful to see the great Tao. If we fight, I won't be distant. Old Taoist Qiu's eyes were cold. He looked up and saw thousands of lights shining behind Zhenren Tao. The ships were lined up for 100 miles and the flags were divided. They were already waiting in formation. Other than the hundreds of disciples from his sect, there were 6 other spiritual lights that rushed into the sky. They were arrogant and demon clouds were rolling. They were obviously the demon kings of a region. This momentum shocked him, and he thought to himself, this Tao Zhenhong really knows how to win people's hearts. How did he manage to gather so many people? Although he also had the help of 2 to 3 monster kings, they paled in comparison to Tao Zhenren. He shouted and took a step forward. He pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. He shouted from afar, Tao Zhenhong, you have repeatedly broken the rules. Sect master expelled you from the sect. He wanted you to repent, but not only did you not repent, you even wanted to set up your own sect. Now that you haven't given up, you want to snatch the celestial abode on the sea. Your disciples are innocent, but they have been implicated by you. Tao Zhenren looked calm and said, in the battle of Tao, there is no right or wrong. If Taoist Qiu wants the celestial abode, there is no need to find another excuse. It is just a waste of your breath. Just come and fight. Qiu Daoren was speechless by Tao Zhenren's words. He wanted to fight, but it was not the best time yet. He could only snort and wave his sleeves in anger. Yifengbo took a few glances and said in a low voice, Taoist Qiu, those wandering cultivators are only here for the benefits. They are just relying on Tao Zhenhong's power. As long as we kill him, they will disappear. Taoist Qiu doesn't have to worry. Qiu Daoren said coldly, these people are just toys in my demon-subduing circle. Taoist Master Pei looked at the two of them and said with a smile, fellow Taoists, don't worry too much. My Wudang Spiritual Hall has brought more than 100 disciples here this time, and there are also a few core formation cultivators among them. They are evenly matched and can compete with Tao Zhenhong. Taoist Lin frowned and suddenly said, but Chongyue True Temple has not appeared yet. We need to be wary of them playing tricks on the side. Don't let others take advantage of us. The 3 of them nodded and said, of course we will be careful. After the 4 of them finished their discussion, they divided the Wild Goose Bridge. They each took a corner and sat with their eyes closed, waiting for the celestial abode to appear. Target equals _blank. Chapter 203. While the two sides were facing off on the ocean, Shen Minggu was standing in a patch of Yin energy and looking down. This Yin Qi was neither mist nor cloud. It was formed from the blade Qi of the Yin slaying saber on his body. He used it to hide and restrain his Qi. Even a nascent soul Taoist master might not be able to see through his body if they did not look carefully. Cultivators who cultivated the origin yin-yang flying blade were usually good at offense and not good at defense. However, with this blade, he could come and go as he pleased and instantly move 100 miles away. Right now, his cultivation level wasn't high enough. Once his cultivation level was high enough, the blade spirit would listen to his commands and he wouldn't need to care about cultivators of the same cultivation level. However, if he wanted to maximize the power of this blade, he would need to drink fresh blood and barely be able to move the true spirit of the blade. Right now, he couldn't afford to offend a core formation cultivator, so he could only choose a mystic light realm cultivator. His eyes scanned around as if he was searching for prey. On the ocean boat, Zheng Han, Xian Chanjin, Qiu Ju, Chujiu, and a group of mystic light realm disciples stood together and pointed at the people in front of them. Is that person Zhang Yan? Zheng Han glanced at him and nodded his head, as expected of a disciple of a large sect. Such elegance isn't something normal cultivators can compare to. Xian Changjin also looked over. Zhang Yan stood at the top of the oceanic boat, his demeanor imposing, his aura elegant and otherworldly. His black robes fluttered in the wind, as if he was riding the wind. His stature was a head taller than the others, and anyone could tell with a single glance that he was extraordinary. This was the same as what the Agarwood Hall disciple had described, so she was sure that the person who took the 7 absolute pillars was this person. Although she came here to take back the treasure, she felt that Zhang Yan was a rare opponent after seeing him. If she could fight with him, she would definitely be able to improve herself. Therefore, she touched the hilt of her sword and said quietly, "This person is my opponent." Zheng Han smiled casually and said, "Since Junior Martial Sister Xian has chosen him as her opponent, we will naturally let him go. However, this person seems to be very strong, so you should be careful." Xian Changjin gently nodded. Zhang Yan saw the dispute between the 5 spiritual masters and thought that if this Tao Xinren was able to suppress these 4 Yuanying spiritual masters, then everything would be fine. If he was unable to suppress them and one of them came out, then his side would not have an easy time. At this time, a thunderous sound suddenly came from 10 miles away, and a rainbow light suddenly appeared. In an instant, half of the sea and sky were dyed red. The hearts of everyone on the sea tightened when they heard this. However, the rumbling did not stop. It was like the beating of war drums, one sound after another. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, there was another explosion that seemed to push the mountains and overturn the seas. It was as if the heavens and the earth had been shaken. Suddenly, the sea surface was filled with golden light, and the waves rolled. Then, the waves parted, and celestial music came from underwater. 49 immortal palaces slowly floated up to the surface of the sea, each with copper pillars and golden roofs, covered with glazed tiles, and connected by corridors and bridges. Golden red light illuminated the sky, and auspicious purple mist supported the jade steps. The auspicious beasts on the roofs all breathed out mist, and an exquisite talisman could be seen flying in the air, emitting a brilliant golden light. If they could obtain this talisman, they would be able to refine the palace and use it for their own use. The cultivators at the scene were all envious, eager to make a move. However, at this moment, the 5 Yuanying spiritual masters were sitting still as if they did not hear it, so no one dared to come forward to fight for it. These 49 immortal palaces were wrapped in a layer of immortal qi, and from the appearance, they all looked similar, and it was hard to tell which was the best. However, Zhang Yan had received the secret message from Tao Xinren beforehand, so he knew that only one of the palaces was where the master of the palaces was located. He looked up, and his gaze finally stopped on an inconspicuous palace at the southeast corner, and his eyes could not help but slightly narrow. At this moment, Tao Xinren stood up, and the boy beside him handed him a horsetail whisk. He took it and waved it, pointing to a distant palace, and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, of the 49 immortal palaces of the Purple Jade Immortal Palace, Clear Feather sect will only take one, and the rest can be taken by yourselves." As soon as his voice fell, the disciples of his sect, led by Zhao Jingcheng, bowed, and then chose a palace to land in. Behind him, Wang Yingfang and hundreds of sword lights all followed. When Clear Feather sect's disciples moved, the 6 monster kings in the formation also did not want to be left behind, and they led their disciples to jump into the formation, and each took a palace. The wandering cultivators on the sea could not hold back, and they surged from all directions, trying to snatch one of the immortal palaces, and it was quite noisy. The monster kings and wandering cultivators that Tao Xinren gathered had an agreement beforehand, so they did not panic, and their actions were orderly. However, these wandering cultivators swarmed forward, and it was chaotic, and many of them could not help but take action first. On the other side, the 4 perfected ones did not move immediately. Qiu Daoren closed his eyes and pondered for a moment, then he opened his eyes and said, 100 years ago, when Tao Zhenhong and I came here, he once obtained a star engraving plate from the Immortal Palace by accident, and it can find the location of the Quasi-Master Palace. We need to be careful of the maze he has set up. Yi Fengbo sneered, no matter what, we cannot let go of the immortal palaces that his disciples have their eyes on. Perfected Pei sneered, that's right, no matter how many places he has taken, just kill them all. If we don't use the power of the heavenly secrets to overturn Tao Zhenhong's sect, how can we get what we want? Qiu Daoren nodded slowly, and a ray of light shot out from his eyes, and he shouted, if that's the case, let's do it. Once the word do it was said, it was like a golden army galloping across the desert sea, overturning mountains, and overflowing with murderous intent. Hundreds of cultivators behind him surged forward like waves, and for a moment, flying swords and conveyances danced like snakes, bursting with thousands of splendor. Xian Chanjin, on the other hand, got off the sea boat at the first instance, and turned into a ray of white light, heading straight for Zhang Yan. Perfected Pei looked at Tao Zhenhong, and a hint of fierceness flashed in his eyes. He waved his sleeve, and a white rainbow shot towards the latter's face. Tao Zhenren smiled, and he said, fellow Daoist, slow down. He did not move his feet, and the jade rui in his hand gently swung, and the white rainbow shot to the side. Qiu Daoren shouted, and a black tiger with 4 feet treading on smoke flew over. He flipped on it, and with a roar, he went up the cloud, and came to the position of the north. He pointed with 2 fingers, and a ray of red light sprinkled down. Tao Zhenren shook his shoulder, and a white light flew out from the top of his head, and condensed into the shape of a heavenly crane in the air, and pecked at the red light. The red light dodged nimbly to the side, and raised its head, hissing and hissing. Its eyes were vicious, and it was a strange snake that was 6 feet long, with red scales and a white belly, and a pair of wings on its abdomen. Taoist Lin frowned, and sighed to himself. He stamped his feet, and a vermilion bird with a colorful crown on its head leaped out of a flame. In the midst of its cry, it carried him up the cloud, and stood on the position of the west. Yi Fengbo had already rushed to the position of the east, and with a sneer on his face, he said, fellow Taoists, why are you still holding back? He shouted, and 2 chi spread out from the top of his head, and smoke and clouds filled the air. A light golden Yuanying holding a jade lotus leaf, and stepping on a ball of clear chi, leaped out from the top of the door. The other 3 also knew that Tao Zhenren's cultivation was far above theirs, and they could not fight him alone. They did not dare to hesitate, and all shook open the door on top of their heads, and released their Yuanying bodies. At this moment, the 4 of them each stood in a position, and surrounded Tao Zhenren. However, he did not panic, and with a shout, his body emitted a golden light, and with a stretch of his body, he also revealed his Yuanying body. A Daoist was suspended in the void, and under his feet was a black tortoise. In his left hand was a rui, and in his right hand was a horsetail whisk. His body was accompanied by a heavenly crane and auspicious clouds, and a long snake that spat pearls circled around him. Behind him, there were 2 black and white swords, and the sword chi was flickering. Seeing this, the 4 Zenrens were all shocked, and exclaimed, Yuanying body. Qiu Daoren's eyes showed a trace of shock. How did Tao Zhenhong's cultivation reach such a level? Could it be, when one reached the realm of Yuanying body, not only could the Yuanying body leave the body, but it could also leave the body and travel the 4 seas. Also, he was only 1 step away from becoming a Zhenren of the Grotto Heaven. But if the body was here, then where did the real body go? At this moment, thousands of thoughts went through his mind, and he finally understood Tao Zhenren's plan. He was the first to react, and he stomped his feet, oh no. Tao Zhenhong has probably already occupied the main hall, and he wants to use it to achieve Tao. We need to quickly find out where his real body is. Among the other 3, Daoist Lin understood the reason the most, and now that he was reminded, he also came to a realization. He looked at Tao Zhenren with shock and admiration, and sighed, Senior Brother Tao, good plan. If the main residents of the celestial palace had obtained the decree, it would only take 1 or 2 days to refine it. But to break through the seal by force, it would take at least 100 years of hard work. Although Tao Xinren had obtained the star engraving plate in the past, Qiu Daoren did not take it to heart because Tao Xinhong had been setting up sects all over the Donghua continent for the past 100 years and had absolutely no time to go to the sea, so Qiu Daoren was not worried. But he never thought that Tao Xinhong would be so scheming. He did not know when he had already achieved the Yuanying body. Moving around the Donghua continent in such a high-profile manner was just to confuse others, to cover up the true purpose of refining the real body in the celestial palace. Today, he was only one step away from establishing his own sect. Tao Xinren knew that once they started fighting, this matter could not be hidden anymore. He laughed and said, "Friends, I'm afraid it's too late to know now." He waved his horsetail whisk, and a mist of light spread out. The heavenly crane, the long snake, and the black and white flying swords all flew down at the same time, pulling the 4 of them into the battle. Qiu Daoren fought with the 2 flying swords for a few rounds. Seeing that the opponent's sword aura was powerful, he could not escape for a while. He could not help but feel anxious. If he waited for Tao Xinhong to refine the celestial palace, wouldn't all his previous hard work be for nothing? And once the other party refined the celestial palace and set up a sect on the sea, he would most likely be able to use this mysterious opportunity to become the enlightened master of the grotto heaven in one go. He knew that at this moment, the only chance he had was to find the main residence of the celestial palace. But of the 49 celestial palaces, which one was the main residence? Qiu Daoren gritted his teeth and instantly made a decision. He counted the 9 primordial mysterious number in his heart to calculate the location of the main residence. If this number was calculated for a mortal, it might not be a problem, but the person he calculated was a cultivator, and the karma involved was huge. In a trance, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He actually had hundreds of years of cultivation wiped away. His originally black hair instantly turned gray, and his flesh also became old and wrinkled. Even the Yuanying became hazy and thin, as if it would disappear with the wind. Taoist Lin cried out in surprise, "Senior brother." Yi Fengbo was also shocked, and said, "Fellow Qiu, why are you doing this?" Enlightened Master Pei frowned, and seemed to be disapproving. Qiu Daoren forced the 2 flying swords away, and said shakily, "In the southeast corner, the position of the main residence." The 4 of them took the time to look in that direction, and saw that there were 8 palaces there, and the disciples of Clear Feather's sect, as well as the 6 great demon kings, were actually gathered there. It was obvious that they were prepared. Taoist Lin took a deep breath. Today, he could no longer keep the feelings of the past, and shouted loudly, "Disciples, listen up, use all your strength to snatch the 8 profound palaces in the southeast corner, target equals, _blank. Chapter 204. After Taoist Lin gave the order, Spiritual Master Pei also waved his hand coldly and ordered all the disciples of Wudang Spiritual Hall to attack the southeast corner. However, just as these 2 people finished ordering the disciples, before they could say anything else, a crane and a snake arrived. They had no choice but to defend with all their strength and could no longer be distracted. At this time, they heard Tao Xinren recite, "The long river flows into the west of the sea, the water from the east separates the turbid air, crossing the torrential waves and covering the clouds, stepping on the astral dipper per step to grasp the profound theory." He waved his horsetail whisk and the scenery in front of him disappeared. Instead, a vast and boundless tide appeared and surrounded the 4 spiritual masters. The 4 spiritual masters only felt that the water was shaking their bodies and they could not stand steadily. They knew that they must have fallen into some kind of profound formation. However, they were Yuanying cultivators after all, they could control their minds and they could still hold on for a while. Previously, the 4 of them surrounded Tao Xinren and they were only evenly matched. Now that Qiu Daoren's vitality was greatly injured, he was in a predicament of being suppressed. In this water, Tao Xinren seemed to be more at ease. However, he was not just attacking fiercely, he was very strategic. Chiu Daoren was currently the weakest among the four, so more than 60% of his attacks landed on him, forcing the others to help him. One had to know that they could barely maintain a situation where they could not win or lose. If Chiu Daoren died, the three of them would not be able to escape with their lives. This kind of situation was equivalent to being led by the nose by Tao Jinren. However, at this time, the four spiritual masters could only grit their teeth and hold on, hoping that the disciples under them could find the main residence, find the location of Tao Jinren's real body, and stop him from refining the immortal palace main residence. However, these disciples did not know what was going on. They only thought that these 8 palaces were the most extraordinary, so they wanted to take them all down. Among them, there was a white smoke that took the lead and headed straight for the palaces occupied by the Pure Feather School. Its speed was several times faster than the others. Guo Lai, Zhao Jingqing, Wang Yingfang, Yang Lin, and the rest of the disciples were guarding one place. Seeing the white smoke approaching them unscrupulously, Zhao Jingqing frowned slightly. A stream of yellow smoke appeared above his head and condensed into a mysterious yellow dragon capturing hands several hundred feet in size, grabbing towards the white smoke like a small mountain. Unexpectedly, the cultivator within the white smoke showed no signs of fear. Not only did he not evade, he instead charged forward. In an instant, the two of them collided. With a loud bang, the yellow smoke rolled, and the mysterious yellow dragon capturing hand actually scattered. Although the hand condensed again after a moment, it could not stop the person from approaching. From the smoke, a handsome Taoist with long eyebrows that reached his temples walked out. He stood in the air with his hands behind his back, and there was a golden staff quaking mountain on his back. His eyes shone brightly and swept across the faces of Zhao Jingqing and the others. He said in a deep voice, "I am Wu Huanchen, a disciple of the Wudang Spiritual Hall. I have long heard that the 4 disciples of the Pure Feather School are all outstanding. Who wants to fight me first?" At this time, on another palace in the southeast corner, Demon King Xian Tong and his sister, Tong Ying, stood there. 9vk first, the other monster kings were all escorted by guards, and they had hundreds of family members and disciples. However, he was the only one who didn't bring a single disciple. He looked at the decree in the mouth of the auspicious beast in a daze, but did not reach out to take it. Tong Ying walked to his side and asked curiously, "Brother, why don't you take it?" Demon King Xian Tong shook his head and sighed, "It's useless even if I take it now." Tong Ying was stunned and asked, "Why?" Demon King Xian Tong smiled meaningfully and turned to look. He touched the back of his hand and said, "He's here." Tong Ying hurriedly looked over and saw a cloud of smoke coming towards them. It was obviously a core formation cultivator. There were only Demon King Xian Tong and his sister here, so they would naturally be targeted by others. He smiled indifferently and said to Tong Ying, "Let's go." Tong Ying was shocked and said, "Big brother, go? How can we give up on the decree so easily?" Demon King Xian Tong looked at her indifferently and did not say a word. He got up and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a cloud of smoke and fled. "Big brother, you," Tong Ying was helpless. She looked at the decree pitifully, stomped her feet and flew away with Demon King Xian Tong. After a while, the core formation cultivator landed on the roof. He was surprised at first, then he was overjoyed. He did not expect to get the decree so easily. What he did not expect was that Demon King Xian Tong did not go far. Instead, he stood on the cloud and watched the battle as if he was an outsider. He had long understood that the outcome of this battle would be decided in a few hours. If Jinren Tao's side won, he would be able to get back his decree. If he lost, the decree would be taken away by others. It was better to give it up first. Without the talisman order, he would not be targeted and no one would pursue him relentlessly. All he needed to do was to wait for an opportunity to strike. He seemed to have taken a step back, but in fact, he was out of the battle and could advance or retreat freely. As for the other 5 monster kings, they were either unwilling to give up on the decree they had obtained, or they were restrained by their disciples, so they could not be as decisive as him. Previously, Zhang Yan was mixed in with the many streaks of light and occupied an inconspicuous immortal palace in a corner, which was the main hall of the immortal palace. The Lu siblings and Demon King Junyu were in 3 different directions, looking around cautiously. Zhang Yan looked at the talisman floating in the mouth of the auspicious beast. This talisman was born when the immortal palace was born. If someone tried to take the talisman away, it would dissipate on its own and a new talisman would appear in the palace. He stretched out his hand and plucked off the golden talisman. After a quick check, he found that it was as Tao Jinren said. With this talisman, he could sense the location of every restriction in the palace. Originally, there were 365 internal restrictions. Now, 362 of them were gone, leaving only 3 that had yet to be broken. At this moment, spiritual master Tao's true body was hiding in the depths of the immortal palace, and he was forcefully refining the restrictions within the palace. Although this method was time-consuming, it could completely erase the traces left behind by the previous owner, and there would not be any future troubles. When these restrictions were gone, it would be the perfect time. The purpose of Zhang Yan's trip was to protect this decree and prevent others from taking it away, so that others would not be able to see through it. As for people sneaking into the palace to investigate, he did not have to worry. The last restriction was called the Mystic Light Illusion Array. Anyone who entered without the talisman would be lost. If Tao Jinren had not obtained the star engraving plate by chance, he would not have been able to enter the depths of the palace so easily. Zhang Yan paced back and forth on the ridge of the palace. He was thinking if he had missed anything. Suddenly, his expression changed. He reached into his sleeve and took out the primordial echoing stars 37 palace guard flags. He chanted a spell and threw it down. The moment the array flag landed, it formed an array. However, before it could spread out, it was repelled by a wave of spiritual qi. The spiritual qi around the palace surged and created a repelling force. It disrupted the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, making the array flag unusable. With a wave of his hand, he retrieved the array flag and nodded to himself. Although he could not set up an array, he had eliminated the possibility of others setting up arrays around here. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome. Suddenly, he looked up as if he had sensed something. He saw a ray of light flying straight toward him. The ray of light came close and disappeared. A woman in a long white dress appeared in midair. She had a delicate and pretty face, and her clothes were spotless, like a white lotus standing alone in the world. Her clear eyes were pure and without any impurities. She looked over quietly and said, "Brother Zhang, my name is Xian Chanjin of Yuanyang sect. I'm not here for the immortal abode, but for the 7 terminal pillars." Zhang Yan was startled when he heard this. Then, he smiled and said, "I see. However, I can see that you are full of vigor and sword energy. I believe that regardless of whether I am willing to return this treasure, you will have to fight me." Xian Chanjin's expression remained calm even though Zhang Yendao had seen through her thoughts. She nodded lightly and said, "Fellow Daoist is right. If my daughter wins, please return the 7 absolute pillars. If my daughter loses, then don't mention anything." Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, "Since Brother Xian has such a wish, I can accompany you since I am free. Please." Although Zhang Yan looked relaxed, Xian Chanjin did not dare to be careless. With a clear shout, she pointed her finger and a ray of sword qi flew over. Zhang Yan smiled. Without moving his shoulders, a ray of light flew down from the top of his head and swept forward. The ray of light disappeared. Xian Chanjin's expression did not change. She touched her waist pouch and grabbed a ball of essence qi. She blew a mouthful of spirit qi upwards. With a clanging sound, this essence qi transformed into hundreds of sharp sword qi and swept over like a rain of light. Zhang Yan let out a shout. A ball of tricolored light appeared from the top of his head. However, as he descended, the sword qi could not get close to him no matter how hard they tried. Xian Chanjin's 2 moves were just probing. Her expression turned slightly serious when she saw that the light on Zhang Yan's body was condensed. She raised her wrist. 5 golden white sword rays flashed from her back, and a murderous aura spread out in an instant. She made a hand sign. The 5 flying swords spun into a ball and rushed toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. A ray of light flew out from between his eyebrows. As soon as it appeared, it showed a graceful posture. It twisted and turned in the air, chasing the wind and catching the shadows. It sprinkled out rays of starlight. With just one sword ball, it was able to take on all 5 flying swords. Zhang Yan had only exchanged blows with one of them. He could tell that Xian Chanjin was using the white tiger fiend light that he had experienced before. However, compared to Chen Qizhong that day, this woman had already turned the flying swords behind her into 5. Her cultivation was slightly higher. However, the current Zhang Yan could not be mentioned in the same breath as before. Xian Chanjin saw that she could not break through Zhang Yan's sword circle. She frowned slightly. With a thought, the 5 flying swords suddenly changed. They were no longer as orderly as before. Instead, they displayed a path of murderous sword moves. Rays of white light converged into sword rays that flickered erratically. They shuttled back and forth in the air like a rain of light. However, the attacks were continuous. In just a moment, Zhang Yan had taken on more than 100 sword attacks. He could also see that although Xian Chanjin's cultivation was higher than Chen Qizhong's, her swordsmanship was not as experienced. Under the opponent's storm-like sword rays, Zhang Yan still looked calm. He let out a long laugh and said, "Fellow Xian, with just this sword attack, you can't beat me." With a thought, the sword ball suddenly turned into a ray of light. In an instant, it struck the 5 flying swords several times at lightning speed. It knocked away the sword rays and created a flaw. At the same time, the sword ball suddenly leaped and separated into a sword ray that went straight for between Xian Chanjin's eyebrows. Xian Chanjin was shocked. She hurriedly dodged. She only felt a coldness passing by her ear. When she reached out to touch it, a strand of her hair had already been shaved off. Target equals _blank. Chapter 205. Xian Chanjin was stunned speechless. That strike just now had shown that Zhang Yan was more skillful than her. If she wanted to win, there was only one way, and that was to use a sword formation. Thinking of this, she could not help but tighten her grip on the sword at her waist. The disciples of Yuan Yang's sword sect were different from ordinary sword cultivators. They could use the sword board as sustenance to set up a sword battle formation. This was one of the killer moves of Yuan Yang's sword sect. But once it was used, it could not be stopped until one side was dead. When Chen Qizhong was expelled from the sect, he was taken back into the sword board, which was equivalent to having one of his arms cut off. When he fought with Zhang Yan, his combat strength was actually greatly reduced. Otherwise, Zhang Yan might not have won so easily if they used a sword formation to fight. Xian Chanjin wanted to use the sword board at this moment, but after thinking for a long time, she could only sigh softly. She was able to discern that the sword strike just now was incomparably swift, and it was actually impossible for her to dodge. However, Zhang Yan didn't kill her, so she was able to escape calamity. In her opinion, it was probably because they were both disciples of the celestial sect of wonders that the other party had shown mercy. Moreover, they were just sparring, not fighting to the death. Since she had lost a move, if she did not know what was good for her and continued to pester him, it would be too shameless. Thinking of this, she took a deep breath and bowed to Zhang Yan. She said softly, "Daoist Zhang's sword art is superb, I am ashamed of my inferiority. From now on, I will not mention the 7 absolute pillars again. But this treasure belongs to senior brother Cho Kun of Shaoqing sect, you must be careful." Zhang Yan was a little surprised. He said, "So this treasure belongs to Daoist Cho. Thank you for reminding me. But with Daoist Cho's pride, even if he wants to get it back from me, he will have to wait until the 16 sect sword competition." Xian Chanjin said in surprise, so you two have known each other for a long time. I am worried too much. She looked deeply at Zhang Yan and said, I hope to meet you again in the sword competition. Zhang Yan nodded with a smile. Xian Chanjin turned her head slightly and saw several rays of light coming towards them. The person in the lead was Zheng Han. She hesitated for a moment before pointing her slender finger behind her and said, Brother Zhang, this senior brother Zheng Han is an expert in the Yin Ray flying needle of 4 stars, you must be careful. The hair on her temples was shaved. Although it was not a big deal, she did not want Zheng Han and the others to see her like this. After she finished speaking, she did not have the slightest intention to stay any longer. She bid farewell to Zhang Yan, stood up and leaped into the clouds, transforming into a white rainbow and flying into the sky. Neither Zhang Yan nor Xian Chanjin knew that there was a wisp of yin qi lingering in the sky while they were fighting. That Shen Minggu was hiding within, waiting for the two of them to fight to reach a critical moment before killing them in one fell swoop, using their blood as a sacrifice for the saber in his hand. However, from the beginning to the end, Zhang Yan and Reverend Xian Chan had not unleashed their true killing moves, so he could not find a suitable opportunity to strike. Seeing that Xian Chanjin had left, Shen Minggu could not help but sigh in his heart. He thought for a moment. Seeing that there were still rays of light coming from afar, he was not in a hurry to leave. He was still hiding in the dark, waiting for a good opportunity. Zheng Han, Chu Jiu, Qiu Zhu, and the others did not dare to act rashly without the orders of their elders, so they were a step slower than Xian Chanjin. However, at this moment, when they got close, they saw that Xian Chanjin had already turned into a ray of light and left, while Zhang Yan was standing on the temple with his hands behind his back. No one knew who won and who lost. Zheng Han frowned. He knew Xian Chanjin's cultivation level. If he fought with this woman, although he was confident that he could win, he would not dare to say that he could win in just a moment. However, looking at Zhang Yan's appearance, it did not look like he had lost, so he could not see through him. He had been in Dao for more than 100 years, and his foundation was solid. He was only one step away from entering the core transformation realm. He was confident that among the 10 sects of Xian men, there were few who could match him among the disciples of the Xian light realm. Since Xian Chanjin had left, he wanted to go forward and challenge her to fight for this divine abode. However, when he looked behind Zhang Yan, he saw Lu Mainyang, her brother, and monster monarch Jun Yu standing not far away. These 3 people were surrounded by smoke and had clouds accompanying them. They were obviously core transformation cultivators. He could not help but be shocked. He could not help but think, I was wondering why junior sister Xian left in a hurry. So that's why. This Zhang Yan has these 3 core transformation cultivators to help him. Junior sister Xian must have seen that things could not be done, so she did not want to stay here and left early. Seeing this situation, he did not dare to go forward rashly. Core transformation cultivators were not easy to deal with. Only one of the 3 of them would be able to kill all of them. He shook his head and turned around, intending to head elsewhere. At this moment, the Wudang Spirit Hall's Wu Huanchen was fighting with Zhao Jingcheng, Wang Yingfang, and the others with his disciples in the southeast corner. Killing intent filled the sky, sparks shot everywhere, and whirlpools surged. Those with weaker cultivations could not get close at all. The 100 or so disciples of the Clear Feather sect were using some kind of magic treasure. Under Guo Lai's lead, they set up a profound formation. Although they were surrounded by many cultivators, they did not panic. It was not something that could be broken in a short time. As for the other palaces, most of them were occupied by monster monarchs. The people fighting them were all core transformation cultivators of the Wudang Spirit Hall. At this moment, both sides were fighting fiercely. Zheng Han looked around and found that no matter where he went, a mystic light realm cultivator like him couldn't interfere at all. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, what's so special about this celestial palace in the southeast corner? Why do the masters want to take down all the palaces here? If it was somewhere else, I'm afraid we would have already obtained a few divine abodes. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt irritated and nauseous. After all, he was cultivating, so he hurriedly circulated his aura and dispelled this irritated feeling. Qiu Ju, Chu Jiu, and the others, however, turned pale. Their bodies swayed, and they adjusted their breathing several times before stabilizing on the flying light. Zheng Han suddenly looked up as if he had sensed something. He saw a ripple in the sky, and a dim yellow mist descended. It rolled on the sea for a radius of several hundred feet. Then, two cultivators, one male and one female, strangely appeared. These two people stood side by side, and they were both core transformation cultivators. The male cultivator had the appearance of an old man. His eyes were deep, and he had long hair without a beard. He wore a large red crane robe, and his expression was awe-inspiring. The woman had willow eyebrows and a slender waist. She wore a rainbow-colored feather robe, and she held a golden ring and ribbon. She was beautiful, but there was a murderous air between her brows. The old man's gaze swept across everyone's faces, and they all felt a chill in their hearts. His gaze finally focused on Zhang Yan's face, and he said in an extremely hoarse voice, "You are that Zhang Yan?" Under this pair of glowing green eyes that seemed to want to devour people, Zhang Yan did not show any fear. He said frankly, "Yes, I am. May I ask who you are?" The old man laughed coldly and said, "I am the little Zhou mountain qi cultivator Su Gongyuan. I heard that you were the one who captured my son Su Qiuo, which caused him to be killed by Tao Zhenhong's disciples. Today, I will deal with you first, then I will go and kill old man Tao's disciples as a sacrifice for my poor son." Lu Meinyang came to Zhang Yan's side with a solemn expression and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, although this person is from the Su clan of Chongyue True Temple, he is a disciple of the Nine-Piece sect, one of the 6 demon sections. His cultivation base is only higher than mine, so you must be careful." Su Gongyuan looked over and said in a deep voice, "Lu Meinyang, you are here too. What, are you trying to stop me from taking revenge?" Lu Meinyang bowed to Su Gongyuan and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist Su, I am indebted to fellow Taoist Zhang. If you want to cause trouble for him, you will have to go through me first." Su Gongyuan's eyes flashed with ferocity. He stared at her and said, "Lu Meinyang, although you are one of the 18 demon monarchs of the East Sea, you are nothing to me. If you insist on seeking death, I will help you." The woman next to him said in a shrill voice, "Master, there is no need to talk to them. Whoever wants to stop us from avenging our son will be killed as well." Su Gongyuan sneered and his green eyes flickered. He said, "My dear, you are right. Never mind, I will take care of these eyesores first before going after that junior." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly frowned and shouted, "How dare you!" With a wave of his hand, a yellow smoke flew out from his sleeve and blocked in front of the woman next to him. A clear light shot up and shone into the yellow smoke, but it could not penetrate it. After a few flashes, it dissipated on its own. Lu Junbai put away the ancient mirror in his hand and sighed inwardly. When Su Gongyuan appeared just now, he had already sensed that something was wrong, so he quietly hid to the side. He had originally planned to catch Su Gongyuan off guard and first use the mystery within the barrier treasure mirror in his hand to capture the woman. If he were to make a move later, his chances of winning would be slightly higher. He thought that he had done it secretly, but who knew that he was still discovered by the other party. However, this action angered Su Gongyuan. He raised his hand and pointed. A Li Yuan flying knife suddenly appeared in mid-air and slashed towards Lu Junbai's neck. Lu Meinyang knew that her brother alone was no match for this person. She opened her mouth and blew out a breath of Dan Sha Qi. This breath flew 3 feet away and turned into white feathers that fluttered in the air like flowers. They danced in the air and blocked the flying dagger, preventing it from falling. At the same time, the woman next to Su Gongyuan leaped and turned into a wisp of smoke. She wanted to find Zhang Yan. However, before she could reach Zhang Yan, a long spear suddenly stabbed out from the side. The tip of the spear radiated with a sharp aura, causing her to have no choice but to dodge to the side. This wisp of smoke circled around the battlefield and gathered in another place. The woman screamed, "Jing Miao Jun, do you want to get involved in this mess too?" "Monster Monarch Jun," you said softly, "Chen Lidong, no need to say more. With me here, I will not allow you to harm fellow Zhang." The woman was furious. "Fine, let's see how long you can stop me." "Monster Monarch Jun," you did not make a sound. She shook the spear in her hand and it made a whistling sound as it pierced towards the woman's face. The woman hurriedly used the ribbon in her hand to block the attack. However, Monster Monarch Jun Yu's spear was relentless and soon she was exhausted. She had no choice but to retreat more than 100 feet before she was able to withstand the attack. Zheng Han, who was watching from the side, was overjoyed when he saw the 5 of them fighting. Originally, there were 3 core formation cultivators in the residence under Zhang Yan's feet. Other than the Clear Feather sect, it was the most dangerous place to provoke. However, as luck would have it, Su Gongyuan had come to kill them. For a moment, the 3 of them were restrained. At this moment, in his eyes, Zhang Yan was alone and could not do anything alone. This was the perfect opportunity to interrogate the Immortal Palace Talisman. This was a heaven-sent opportunity. If he did not take advantage of this, when would he be able to do so? Without uttering a single word, he controlled the Xuanji Yin Ray flying needle, and thrust it toward Zhang Yan. Target equals _blank. Chapter 206. Fighting a group of heroes alone. Zheng Han had experienced hundreds of years of training and had met many people of the same path. He was no longer someone who stuck to conventions. He was very clear that his Yin Ray flying needles might not be faster than Zhang Yan's sword ball. If he didn't make the first move, it would be difficult for him to gain the upper hand. Therefore, when he released the needle, it was extremely stealthy, fast and swift. Only a thin, almost undetectable silver thread swept across the surface of the water, making an arc and heading straight for Zhang Yan's back. His Xuanji Yin Ray needles were refined from the needles of a divine pine tree in Taihao School. Once it pierced into a cultivator's body, there would be no external injuries, but in a flash, it could shut off the opponent's meridians and cut off their spiritual vigor. This needle was not good at fighting head-on, but it was mainly based on trickery. It was often impossible to guard against. Therefore, Zheng Han's attack this time was deep in the essence of controlling needles. He wanted to succeed in one strike, but just now, when the flying needles were 10 feet away from Zhang Yan, a lightning-like sword light came down and blocked the needles. In a split second, the two collided and created a stream of sparks. They fought in the air for a while before separating. Zhang Yan used his divine sense and the sword ball flew back, turning into a stream of light that danced around him. He sneered in his heart. Not to mention that he had been warned by Xian Chan earlier, even if he wasn't prepared, his sword ball had real consciousness. In times of danger, it would fly out to protect its owner, so how could it be injured by others? Zheng Han saw this and snorted. He knew that his sneak attack had failed, so he simply switched from a covert attack to an open one. He didn't hide his strength anymore. With a point of his finger, a total of 28 Xuanji Yin Ray flying needles were released. They turned into flying needles that filled the sky and attacked like rain. It was Zhang Yan's first time fighting with a cultivator who could control flying needles. Seeing that the opponent was coming at him aggressively, he didn't dare to be careless. He smiled slightly and raised his hand to point. His sword orb suddenly trembled and split into 7 dazzling sword lights that flew forward to meet the flying needles. In the blink of an eye, the flying needles collided with each other. The 28 Yin light needles flickered up and down as they suddenly dispersed and converged, and they transformed into numerous silver threads that shuttled back and forth like swimming fish in search of loopholes and flaws as they attempted to bore out of the sword light net. But they were constantly obstructed by the sword lights that seemed like flashing shadows in the sky, causing them to be unable to break out of the sword circle in the end. The two of them fought back and forth, silver rain scattered in the sky, golden light flickered incessantly, long whistling sounds rang out incessantly, in the gloomy twilight, dazzling sparks shot out from time to time, no one knew how many times they had exchanged blows in a split second. Many of the profound light realm cultivators present were shocked when they saw the two fighting so intensely. They thought that if they went up, no matter which one they faced, they would probably lose in a short moment. Chu Jiu was also amazed as he watched, and said, in the past few years, whenever senior brother Tsing Han fought with others, he only needed to throw out a flying needle, and he would win within a few rounds. This Zhang Yan is actually so powerful, to be able to fight senior brother Tsing to a draw. Qiu Ju nodded repeatedly at the side. He had also fought with Tsing Han before and knew how powerful he was. Now that he saw this scene, he had to admit that this Zhang Yan was worthy of being a Qinsung disciple. Not to mention the various techniques of the sect, just this flying sword technique was enough to be praised. Behind them, Lady Shan and senior sister Kai were also dazzled by the scene. Although Lady Shan knew that Zhang Yan had once killed 2 of the 9 leaders' Demon King's clones by himself and was not an ordinary cultivator, her beautiful eyes were still filled with splendor. However, Tsing Han became more and more shocked as he fought. He said, "I've met many sword cultivators of the same generation, and there are even a few who are Shaoqing disciples. However, in terms of flying sword techniques, there are very few who are more brilliant than this Zhang Yan." Previously, when he saw Zhang Yan splitting the sword pill into shadows, he did not think much of it. How could someone who could kill Bai Gong Hao from the Chongyue True Temple be so simple? It was reasonable that he had such abilities. However, when he saw that not only did Zhang Yan's sword move freely, but it was also completely changing according to the opportunity without any fixed rules, he knew that he had underestimated him previously. He was clear in his heart that even though it seemed more brilliant for him to control 28 flying needles at the same time, flying needles were different from sword pellets. They had abandoned the righteous path and focused on the strange path. That was why he could control them more freely. Moreover, even so, he had not reached the stage of controlling every single flying needle at the same time. He was not like Zhang Yan, who could control every single sword beam as he wished. What made him feel worse was that although the two of them seemed to be evenly matched, and it was a stalemate, he knew that sword cultivators were most skilled in flying and evasive attacks. However, he knew that sword cultivators were most skilled in flying and dodging attacks. They stressed upon arriving like a ray of light, leaving like an arrow, invading like fire, and descending like lightning. However, Zhang Yan was standing on the immortal abode without moving. It was obvious that he was at ease, and he was far from using his true abilities. This time, Zhang Yan only split out 7 sword beams to fight. It was not that he was underestimating his opponent, but that he was surrounded by enemies, so he had to leave behind a few to guard against others. Moreover, when his opponent's flying needles attacked, he used clever moves one after another, and every time, he would come at him from an unbelievable angle. It was rare for his opponent to come, so he purposely slowed down his sword moves and secretly observed his opponent's needle techniques to make up for the shortcomings in his sword techniques. Tsing Han was a person with rich battle experience. Although Zhang Yan did it covertly, he gradually realized that something was wrong. Although only a moment had passed, his opponent's sword moves were sharper and smoother than before. In his defense, there were faint counterattacks, but they were all drawn but not released. After a few times, the path of his sword became even more unfathomable, and the pressure in his heart unknowingly increased. Tsing Han knew that it was not good. If they continued to fight like this, when Zhang Yan completely understood the changes in his needle techniques, how could he talk about winning? However, he had a method that could increase the speed of the flying needles by a few times in a short period of time. Although it would not last long, once it was within a few feet, his opponent would have almost no chance of turning the tables. However, after using this method, he would also be exhausted due to the excessive use of spiritual qi. He would not be able to recover for at least a few breaths' time. If he was ambushed at this time, he would not be able to fight back at all. He thought quickly and felt that if he continued to delay, it would be disadvantageous to him. Moreover, he had his senior and junior brothers by his side. Even if there was danger, they would be able to resist. After thinking carefully, he made up his mind. He immediately took a breath of spiritual chi and made a gesture. The 27 flying needles were instantly activated by a spiritual opportunity. Suddenly, they emitted a deep green light, and their speed suddenly increased. They pierced through the sword net and headed towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. The needles were unusually fast. He might be able to escape in time if he transformed into a sword, but he would definitely be at a disadvantage and pursued. How could he be willing to do that? He immediately laughed coldly. Not only did he not dodge, but he also pointed with his fingers. The 7 sword gleams also turned into long rainbows and flew towards Tseng Han. Seeing that Zhang Yan actually used such a life-risking method, Tseng Han was shocked. The flying needles were about to hit Zhang Yan. If he stopped now, wouldn't all his previous efforts be in vain? However, if he maintained the momentum of the needles, although he could stab Zhang Yan to death, if he allowed the 7 sword gleams to hit him, he would definitely die. At this moment, his mind was filled with thoughts. In the end, he did not dare to gamble with his life. He hurriedly recalled the flying needles and blocked the sword path. However, this was a hasty action after all. Hence, one of the sword gleams missed and arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. Tseng Han was about to take out the 10 feet long relic Zoisha in his hand, but he suddenly felt his body weaken. Seeing the cold gleam slashing towards his neck, he was instantly scared out of his wits. He thought that he would not be able to escape. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt a gray gleam fly over his head. The purple light in his ancestral aperture pulsated as if it was about to fly out. He suddenly looked up and shouted, "Which scoundrel is it? Get out here!" He pointed his finger, and with a flash of brilliance, he slashed at an empty space. There was a disturbance in the air, and 2 saber gleams, one black and one white, flew up and blocked the sword gleam. The person inside the pill could no longer hide and was revealed. Shen Minggu's expression was unsightly. Just now, he had seen the 2 of them fight to the death, so he had used the slaughtering saber to kill Zhang Yan and then end Tseng Han's life. His timing was not bad, and his judgment was accurate. However, he never expected that the killer's shady saber would only fly around the top of Zhang Yan's head, and as if it was afraid of something, it turned back. When he wanted to activate it again, he simply ignored him, causing Zhang Yan to be able to detect his presence. However, with his interference, Tseng Han managed to escape. The sword light deviated slightly and only left a small wound on his shoulder. Although it was bleeding profusely, he was still alive. He hurriedly left the battlefield and took out a medicinal pill to consume. Zhang Yan glanced at the 2 flying sabers and said, "I was wondering who was hiding like this." So it was a disciple of Chongyue Zhenguan. Shen Minggu was annoyed, and said with a sullen face, "Zhang Yan, the last time you challenged me, I happened to have something to do and left, so you were free for a while. Today, I will definitely let you know the power of my origin-leaving flying saber." "Oh. You are that Shen Minggu?" Zhang Yan said coldly, "Since you want to fight, why hide? Just attack." Shen Minggu thought, the killer's shady saber actually refused to kill this person, there must be something strange about him. However, even if I don't use this saber, do you think I'm afraid of him? He stood up and leaped into the air, and with a loud shout, a ray of light shot out from the top of his head. Above him were 12 origin-leaving yang sabers, and below them were 12 origin-leaving yin sabers. All of them were like rays of qi, swallowing and spitting out light. They moved and circled within the light, flickering. He shook his sleeves, like a general ordering his troops. The 24 origin-leaving yin flying sabers immediately gathered into 4 groups, and divided into 6 groups. They were spread out over 300 feet in all directions. Only then did he cast a spell and slash down. After Zhang Yan received the yin-yang flying saber technique, although he did not practice it, he knew quite a lot about the variations of the saber's power. Later on, he observed Su Qiu's fight, so he already had a good grasp of the technique. He let out a long laugh, and with a flick of his sleeves, the sword light shook and turned into 7 rays of light that swept up. Shen Minggu and Zhang Yan fought for a few rounds, but suddenly felt that something was wrong. He had been watching the battle for a long time, and could clearly see that Zhang Yan's sword path was a steady and defensive one. Thus, he had already thought of a way to deal with it. However, the opponent's sword path had suddenly become incomparably sharp, and it was very different from stone. He felt that every strike of the opponent seemed to be aimed at his vital points, purposely taking advantage of the gaps and slashing at places that were extremely uncomfortable for him. From the beginning, he was forced to the point that his hands and feet were tied, and he could not use his saber's power. However, Zhang Yan did not let him go. Seeing that the sword's power had been channeled to the extreme, the 7 rays of sword light were overbearing, constantly attacking, and not giving his opponent a chance to fight back. Shen Minggu's judgment was wrong, and he lost one move, and fell into a disadvantageous position. At first, he seemed to be able to exchange blows with Zhang Yan, and the saber light was gradually compressed to a few feet, and he was barely able to maintain his order. However, everyone could see that he would be defeated sooner or later. This scene shocked everyone present. Shen Minggu was famous in the East Sea, and even Seng Han from Chongyuezhen Temple did not dare to say that he could win. Who would have thought that in a short while, he would be beaten to such a sorry state by Zhang Yan, and could only defend himself? However, Shen Minggu also had his own difficulties. It was not that he was inferior to Zhang Yan by too much, but in a battle between experts like them, even the slightest flaw would be caught by the opponent, and if he did not use his magical weapon, it would be very difficult for him to turn the tables. After Seng Han took the medicinal pill, he sat on the Bao Ji and adjusted his breathing a few times. His wounds had recovered, and his chi flow had also stabilized. Only then did he stand up. He looked up and saw that Shen Minggu was clenching his teeth and holding on, as if he was about to lose. His eyes narrowed, and a strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. With a flick of his finger, a flying needle flew towards Zhang Yan's back. This move of his was not to help Shen Minggu. With his insight, he could naturally see the real reason why Shen Minggu was being suppressed. Therefore, he only needed to slightly restrain Zhang Yan. Once Shen Minggu recovered his breath, he would be able to reverse the situation, and the two of them would definitely fight even more intensely, allowing him to reap the benefits. Who would have guessed that Zhang Yan did not pay any attention to him? The sword in his hand did not change at all, and he only used the mysterious contract with the spirit, allowing the flying needle to pierce his body. However, the needle seemed to have encountered a layer of sturdy material, and could not pierce through. Seng Han's heart shook, and he hurriedly withdrew the flying needle. Seeing that there were no traces of blood on the tip of the needle, he was shocked and suspicious. He thought to himself, could it be that this Zhang Yan has a protective treasure on him? His eyes flickered, and he thought to himself, today, I have already offended this person. If I don't get rid of him, he will become a great enemy of mine in the future. He was also a decisive person, and thinking to this point, he no longer hesitated. With a shout, he jumped back into the battle, controlled the flying needle, and once again attacked Zhang Yan. Shen Minggu could not help but be overjoyed. Even though he did not know why the opponent wanted to save him, he was at the end of his rope, and if he did not retrieve a treasure, it would be difficult for him to resist. But Zhang Yan's attacks were like a tidal wave, how would he have time to retrieve a treasure? In moments of crisis like this, it was easy to see the difference between a treasure with a true consciousness and a normal treasure. Once the treasure felt that its owner's life was in danger, it would automatically come out to protect its owner. Originally, with the killer shade blade, Shen Minggu was not afraid. But now, for some reason, the blade was not moving, and he felt that his life would be in danger. Now that Seng Han had arrived, he saw a glimmer of hope. If he put in more effort, there was a high chance that he could join forces and kill Zhang Yan. Thinking to this point, he immediately became spirited, and was about to raise his blade again. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yan pointed his finger, and the 7 swords vibrated. Suddenly, 7 more swords split into 7 swords, and they went to meet Seng Han. Shenming-gu, who had just shown signs of a counterattack, was suppressed by him in the blink of an eye. This Zhang Yan, he can split into 14 swords in one breath? At this moment, not only the people present, but even Tseng Han and Shenming-gu were also shocked. Zhang Yan had just fought with Tseng Han for a while, and he was already familiar with the changes. Now, there was no need for him to hold back. With a push of his mind, the 7 swords flashed, and in just a moment, Tseng Han was sweating profusely. When Tseng Han saw that he was fighting against 2 people alone, and not only was he not at a disadvantage, but he was also suppressing the 2 of them, he was even more fearful of him. He looked around and saw that there were no less than 100 disciples from the Wudang Spiritual Palace and the Nanhua sect surrounding them, and there were more than 1,000 wandering cultivators and unaffiliated sects watching the battle. His heart moved, and he shouted, "Fellow Taoists, why are you sitting at the side and watching? This person has the decree of the immortal palace, whoever takes him down will get this immortal abode." Chu Jiu and Qiu Ju looked at each other and immediately jumped into the battlefield. The disciples of the Wudang Spiritual Palace and the Nanhua sect also came to their senses and joined the battle. With someone taking the lead, the other cultivators watching the battle also seemed to see an advantage. Immediately, dozens of people took out the flying swords in their hands and attacked together. Zhang Yan saw all kinds of lights rising and falling on the surface of the sea, and the spirit qi was like a tide that rolled over like a raging wave, causing his robe to flutter. Facing this fierce attack, not only was he not afraid, but the fighting spirit in his heart was also aroused. He let out a long howl that could stop the clouds, and he shook the sword pellet open. In an instant, 16 brilliant swords flashed up into the sky. #target =_ blank. Chapter 207. 1 against 100. As the setting sun set, the horizon looked like it was smeared with vermilion blood. As yin and yang alternated, endless murderous vibes bloomed. Dozens of cultivators flew in the sky, sweeping away the clouds and the atmosphere, pressing down with the momentum of swallowing the moon and the sun. However, a few cultivators at the forefront suddenly saw a white light flashing on the surface of the sea, blinding their eyes. In a trance, there seemed to be a white blade's essence flying past them. Before they knew it, their heads slid off their necks and fell into the clouds. From afar, the people saw a white light flashing in front of them and several people were beheaded. They couldn't help but be shocked and hurriedly stopped to look up. Under the sky, they saw Zhang Yan standing with his hands behind his back, his robe fluttering in the wind. Behind him, the 16 sword pellets were emitting clear cold air, like stars shining in the night sky. The cold light was like frost, it was bitingly cold. One of the female cultivators couldn't help but be frightened and said timidly, "This person's flying sword is very powerful, I'm afraid we're not his match." Hesitation appeared on many people's faces when these words were spoken. Seeing that everyone seemed to have the intention to retreat, Tseng Han's eyelids twitched and he shouted, "Fellow Taoists, he's only one person, how can he fight against hundreds and thousands of us? Don't panic, as long as we surround him, when the time comes, we will use all our swords. Can he still escape?" After Tseng Han said this, he gave a look to the people behind him, stood up and rushed towards Zhang Yan with a murderous aura. Behind him were dozens of people, followed by a group of disciples of Wudang Spiritual Hall, who also followed silently. Under his encouragement, some of the rogue cultivators who wanted to take advantage of the situation also gathered their courage and rushed over again. Zhang Yan's eyes were cold, his chest was already boiling with murderous intent. He looked up at the sky and saw the stars moving in the sky, the wind and clouds gathering. Unconsciously, his spiritual vigor surged. Suddenly, he raised his spirit and shouted, riding on the sword, turning into a stream of light and flying into the sky. The rest of the sword rays followed him, not dodging at all, but killing straight into the crowd. A blue-robed cultivator suddenly saw the sword ray appear in front of him and wanted to defend, but just as he raised his magic treasure, he felt his vision blur. Where the light passed, he was already beheaded. Before the few people beside him could react, this streak of sword light had already swept past them, and they were all cut into two. Slightly further away cultivators saw this scene. All of them were horrified. They all released their magic treasures to protect themselves, but who knew that the sword rays suddenly turned and flashed, then went to another place. Seeing Zhang Yan killing people like chickens, everyone was terrified. They didn't dare to gather in one place. They quickly scattered, preparing to fight with their magic treasures. One Wudong spiritual hall female cultivator used her spell, her eyes fixed on the sword ray, and held a flower in her hand, a flower basket. Among them, Zheng Han and Shen Minggu had the highest cultivation. They chased closely behind Zhang Yan, and unknowingly, they had already raised Zhang Yan to be the greatest enemy of their lives. Among them, Zheng Han and Shen Minggu had the highest cultivation. They chased closely behind Zhang Yan, and unknowingly, they had already raised Zhang Yan to be the greatest enemy of their lives. Cultivators like them knew that they couldn't leave a future trouble for themselves, but today was the best time to get rid of this person, so no matter what, they couldn't stop. But Zhang Yan used the sword ray to come and go, avoiding the strong and attacking the weak. He didn't tangle with them at all, and only targeted the cultivators with weaker cultivation. He sneered in his heart and thought, I'll let you guys be free and unfettered for now. When I kill all of you, it will be time for you two to be beheaded. At this moment, he suddenly saw a familiar face. It was the disciple of Nanhua sect, Qiu Ju, whom he had seen before entering the outer sea. A cold intent appeared in his eyes. In today's battle, it didn't matter which sect they were from, as long as they dared to surround him, he would kill them all. Qiu Ju was originally following behind Zheng Han, but his flower falcon was taken away, and he couldn't use even 70% of what he had. In addition to the fact that his flying light was not very brilliant, he gradually fell behind when chasing after Zhang Yan. At this moment, when he saw Zhang Yan turn the sword ray around and attack him, he couldn't help but be so scared that his spirit left his body, and he lost all his will to fight. He turned around and wanted to escape, but how could he be faster than the sword ray? Before he could escape, a rainbow light flashed by, and with a scream, he was actually cut in half at the waist. After killing Qiu Ju, Zhang Yan didn't stop, and with a flash of sword ray, he had already gone several hundred feet away. His body and sword became one, and this graceful sword light flew back and forth, appearing and disappearing at the same time. Everywhere it passed, fresh blood splattered, and severed limbs and bones rained down. Although there were more than 100 cultivators here, they couldn't make him stop for even a moment, and panic couldn't help but spread among them. Although Zheng Han led his fellow sect members in an attempt to stop him, how could they keep up with the unpredictable sword ray? It looked like 100 people were surrounding one person, but in reality, Zhang Yan defeated them one by one, and taking their heads off was as easy as flipping his palm. Seeing that he still couldn't catch up to Zhang Yan, he couldn't help but feel anxious, and he turned around and shouted, "Junior Marshal Brother, why aren't you using your treasure?" Chu Jiu was reminded, and instantly came to a realization. Looking at the sword ray, he muttered something, and suddenly took out the phoenix binding vine in his hand. A jade vine rose in the air, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a rope that was thousands of feet long, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into hundreds of ropes of different sizes, and covered the void. But before he could activate the treasure to descend, he suddenly felt a coldness pressing on him, and the cold penetrated his bones and muscles. He was shocked, and when he wanted to dodge, a sword had already come from the void. He felt a chill on his neck, and the head of the 6 sons had already disappeared without a trace. Zheng Han was very close, but seeing this, his eyes were about to pop out, and he shouted, "Zhang Yan, how dare you kill my junior martial brother?" He controlled the flying needles to go forward, but after chasing for more than 100 feet, the sword ray had already disappeared, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of powerlessness and humiliation in his heart. Zhang Yan's sword flew, and he moved back and forth, killing until blood rained down, as if he was in an unstoppable state. At this moment, Zheng Han and Shen Minggu also realized how terrifying a sword cultivator was. "Even if you have thousands of people, I will fly away with a sword." At this time, Zhang Yan had already lost count of how many people he had killed, and the more he fought, the more he felt satisfied. Qi flowed through his chest, and he could not help but let out a long, clear cry that resounded through the heaven and earth, and he chanted, "A lone star falls on the wilderness, shooting chi into the sky, a sword that has been tempered 100 times, stirring up the cold of the heavens." A strange scene appeared on the sea. Tao Xinren alone was suppressing 4 Yuanying enlightened masters, and at this moment, the 4 of them could only bitterly hold on, while Zhang Yan alone was fighting 100 people, and not only was he not at a disadvantage, but he was also killing people to the point where they lost all their spirit and courage, and lost all their courage. At the same time, 100 miles away, a man with a golden crown on his head, wearing a dragon robe, had punched a little girl to death, but the strange thing was, there was not a single drop of blood or flesh splashing out from the corpse. He retracted his fist, and with a burning gaze, he looked at the panting woman in colorful clothes in front of him, and said, "A few insignificant disciples of the corpse cult dare to fight in front of me. Song Nyangzi, it is better for you to surrender now, lest I use force on you." The woman in colorful clothes was in despair. She had just come out of the corpse cult from the corpse cult, and she originally wanted to seize an immortal abode, but who knew that this demon King Jiu Kuei would take a liking to her vain body? Would her decades of cultivation go down the drain? She gritted her teeth, took out a knife, and placed it on her neck, and said, "Even if I die, I will not let you have your way." Demon King Jiu Kuei laughed loudly, and said insolently, "Song Nyangzi, in front of me, how can you die?" Song Nyangzi's face was pale. Not to mention that she did not want to die, even if she really wanted to. As a demon king, he would have a way to stop her. She sighed in her heart, and was about to give up. However, at this moment, Demon King Jiu Kuei's expression changed, and anger and hatred appeared on his face. With a roar, a gust of wind swept up, and he turned into a rolling black cloud, and flew away. Song Nyangzi could not help but be surprised, and her expression changed a few times. Now that her flying carriage and her disciples were destroyed, how could she walk out of this vast ocean alone? She gritted her teeth, and thought, instead of waiting for death here, why not go to the place where the immortal abode appeared? Maybe there is a chance of survival there. After making up her mind, she also headed towards the north to search for traces. Not long after, she arrived at the place where many cultivators were fighting. Hearing the deafening sounds of fighting on the sea, and the dancing lights of different colors, her beautiful face changed slightly. Her beautiful eyes looked around, and she immediately found Demon King Jiu Kuei. She saw that he had turned into a ball of black gas, and his fierce eyes flickered as if he was staring at a dragon-like sword ray in the sky. Song Nyangzi looked over as well, and what she saw caused her to be dumbstruck. She saw a ray of sword light moving unrestrainedly in the sky while stirring up a rain of blood, and it actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position while being besieged by over 100 people. Everywhere it passed, everyone would move aside and didn't dare bear the brunt of its might. In just a short moment, no less than 100 people had died beneath this person's sword, and she couldn't help but exclaim with shock. "Who's this? He's actually so formidable." However, thinking about it, Demon King Jiu Kuei was hiding in the black gas, and it was obvious that he had his eyes on this person. She sighed in her heart, no matter how strong he is just a mystic light realm cultivator. How can he win against a core transformation demon king? At this moment, Demon King Jiu Kuei suddenly dashed out and shouted, "Little thief, you dare to destroy my clone, hand over your life." He stretched out his hand, and it turned into a giant claw that was 10 feet wide, and it went straight for Zhang Yan's body. Haze appeared in the sky, and the clouds covered the moon. This giant claw trapped him inside. In an instant, Zhang Yan only felt the ray of light stiffen, and an endless force grabbed him, causing him to be unable to move. Seeing this giant claw coming at him, his eyes flashed, and he shouted. He circulated a golden core that he had already swallowed in his stomach. In an instant, he felt like a door had opened in his body, and endless energy poured into his limbs like a tsunami. His cultivation level rose steadily, and he directly entered the core transformation realm. At this moment, there seemed to be countless things in his mind. Pictures and figures flashed in front of him, but he calmed his mind and was not moved at all. He only shook his body and broke free. He took a step forward in the air and transformed into a wisp of golden mist that narrowly avoided the large hand that was attacking him. Demon King Jiao Kuei did not expect such a change at all. This claw that he was so sure of actually missed. His breath stagnated. How could Zhang Yan let go of such a great opportunity? He reached into his sleeve and took out the sword talisman that he had carefully made. He circulated the power of his core and slapped it at Demon King Jiao Kuei. With a crack, it was like a bolt of lightning that came out of nowhere. A shrill scream resounded across the sea, and instantly, a rain of blood sprayed out like a fountain. The smell of blood filled the air, and within the blood mist, a black gas escaped in panic like a stray dog. Song Nyangzi was so shocked that he was tongue-tied. He originally thought that Zhang Yan was dead for sure, but who knew that a sword ray that was as bright as the sun would flash across the sky, and Demon King Jiao Kuei escaped with injuries. Who was this? He was clearly a mystic light realm cultivator, but he could actually injure Demon King Jiao Kuei with one sword strike? Even Shen Minggu and Zheng Han felt that something was wrong when they saw this scene, and the thought of retreating sprouted in their hearts. Just as Shen Minggu had this thought, he suddenly felt a shiver run down his spine. Looking up, he saw that not far in front of him, Zhang Yan had stepped out of the smoke that had yet to dissipate. In his shock, he quickly retreated. At the same time, he raised his hand and the 24-li origin yin-yang flying daggers slashed down. Mockery appeared in Zhang Yan's eyes. He casually slapped and actually smacked away all the flying daggers in front of him. When Shen Minggu saw this, he was so frightened that his soul almost left his body. How could he still be in the mood to fight? He used all his strength to flee, but who would have thought that a wisp of smoke would catch up to him in the blink of an eye? With a sneer on his face, Zhang Yan stepped forward and grabbed Shen Minggu's neck, lifting him up like a little chick. He exerted some strength in his hand, and with a "kacha" sound, Shen Minggu's neck was broken. With a casual wave of his hand, a murderous aura rolled out, incinerating Shen Minggu's body and origin spirit. With a wave of his hand, Zhang Xian stowed the other party's pouch away before turning around to chase after Zheng Han. #target=_blank. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.